we're late. Awesome. So, good morning and welcome to the September 14th version of the Water Committee meeting. Thanks everyone for being here. We'll begin, as we usually do, with an opportunity for the public to speak. Anyone who'd like to get up and address the handful of us that are here, please come forward. Yes, sir. Please. And if you would, just please speak into the microphone so that you can be heard for the folks that are listening via Zoom.
Good morning, Lance Kyle, 226 Cascade Caverns Road. Just a technical question, basically. I see that the Zoom function is activated. I was just curious about the recording of this meeting. Will it be available afterwards to the public?
As far as I know, it will be.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to come up and say a few words? Is there anyone out on the Zoom call that would like to speak? I don't see anyone with a hand raised, but I don't want to miss the opportunity. I don't see anyone, so we'll go ahead and move forward. We have a lot of ground to cover today, so we're going to move directly into subcommittee reports. Ben?
Yeah, so just real quick on Internet of Water. So the good news is, of course, that we got our funding that we needed from the Mitchell Foundation to press on. We're also talking about what are our next steps as far as creating the actual data hub. And then I talked to VNA about the modeling, and I said, hey, we'd really like to get that because we think we can start doing some of our other planning based off that model. And of course, on that end, she and Michael are very much data scientists. So even though she's finished her thesis, her master's, they're still working on it to get it just right. And she said, give me another month. And that was last Thursday. So I said, okay, another month. I said, but don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. It's not going to be perfect anyways. We just
right. It's just a tool.
It's a tool, and things vary, right? People's behavior varies, but so does water supply factors. I mean, so I think she took that to heart because I emphasized it about 4 times. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
That's good information. Thank you. Appreciate that. Anything else other than the action items that we'll be covering later, Ben?
Anything else on what? On the action?
Just in terms of the committee work that you're doing. You've been doing the Internet of Water, and we're talking about data gathering and that sort of thing. And I know
right.
Nick has been providing some of the data we've gotten, but I think, Nick, we're still missing a handful of folks.
Yeah, I haven't gotten much response at all based off of my last emails. So what we've got, I think, is about what we're going to get.
Jeez.
So I'll reach out again, but I don't have high hope.
Okay. Does it make sense to write another letter, or is there something that we can do that you think that would help get people to act?
I don't know if another letter is going to get it because I can reach out just directly through the phone, getting people on the line and trying to get action. So we can certainly try.
If there's a need to set up a meeting and like an actual, like, hey, can we just come talk to you about this? I mean, I'd be happy to wingman as needed, but I guess I just wonder if that's a better way to help them feel like, it's not just sort of this rogue ask from a voice on the phone, but people in the room.
What are your thoughts on that, Nick? I mean, at the end of the day, we're looking for collaboration across all fronts.
Right.
And I realize that particularly when we're talking about smaller water providers, that a lot of these folks, they're everything from fry chef to dishwasher. They do it all. So
right.
Getting their attention is challenging. But
that's really where I guess my question would lay is, have we gotten all the major contributors of data? I think we've, for the most part, gotten that. It's just the small, maybe 3 to 5 person systems. It's weighing do we really keep going after those versus we have the bulk data that we need to kind of corroborate what we need. But I would really rely on you all to tell me to keep moving forward with the smaller providers.
So since so much of this water that we're talking about is GBRA water, is it under lock and seal on your end, or is that,
This is groundwater primarily, I believe, that we're tracking now.
Well,
whatever.
no, groundwater we have a pretty good fix on, I think, from a standpoint of if these are commercial wells, they're utilities, then they have to be reporting. Well, that's not true. Do you have any sense on that?
If they're permitted, they have to be recording their metering.
So then, yeah.
Well, so what you're saying is there may be another way to get the data.
Well, yeah, I mean, most of it's GBRA water. Is it under lock and key, I guess, is the question.
Well, for usage or for new supplies?
For usage, so for example, we have, say, WCID number whatever, 3, let's say, and you guys are supplying them with water. Is it possible for us to see their usage?
Yeah, we can provide data for actual usage. However, very few of our customers are sole source GBRA. So we typically provide base flow, where the customers have other sources of supply to handle their peaking and other needs.
I see. So we have to figure out who those sources of supply are. And who are they usually? I mean, there's
Yeah, but
certainly
it's a small population
Exactly.
of customers. I think we probably would sit down and already know just by going through the mechanics of that. So, and then we'd say, all right, it's very likely it's groundwater wells. It's wells with you guys. So.
Right, fair enough, exactly, right. All right, well, then that could solve a lot of our data needs, like, right there.
We can assist with that.
Because it's groundwater, it's GBRA mostly at this point, and then it's burning it's surface water a little bit.
So, Darrell, how many contracts in the county offhand? 5?
Well, we'll have Barney, Fair Oaks, Kendall West, and Marilomas, and Cordillera.
So we have 5. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Maybe we take that route and make sure we've got each of those buttoned up, Nick. What we're looking for is baseline data anyway, and then hopefully an entree to go to the Internet of Water thing as a next step. But it's that baseline data that we're hoping to take and use for extrapolation and modeling going forward, and be able to use it to plug in some assumptions so we can talk about what do we think the worst case scenario is, and how do we do some planning and that sort of thing.
I think we got from
I mean,
Wicked 1.
Mike's doing all that here locally, but this is not just a local problem. So
I think we got Wicked 1 data correct. I remember seeing that come across. WCID number 1, the company
Yes.
Wicked, which is probably one of the major ones, and then we
That's
got
all
a couple
groundwater.
of the small ones.
That's all groundwater, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So,
beyond that, I'm not sure, were there any in particular that we're looking to push to get? Or
not right now. I mean, it seems like the playing field's getting a little more complex with different water providers, but for now it's still simple for now, right? So let's at least leverage that, rather than trying to engage other hypotheticals that aren't yet realized, but are real.
You can at least start analyzing the data that is available for these entities.
Right. Exactly.
all right.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you, Nick.
That's awesome. That solved a lot right there. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else on your end, Ben?
Nothing comes up. I mean, we obviously have we have presentations coming up today that we'll get to, but I also was thinking about reaching out to, while I've got the mic, reaching out to Nick Dornack at Meadow Center for Water the Environment. He was kind of the force behind the One Water School at Wimberley, and I think it would be worth us, as BISD is looking at building new schools, I think it would make sense to talk to him about how we could potentially have those be learning labs for water efficiency and water conservation, which is essentially what One Water. And so, we've talked about curriculums and all that stuff. Yeah, those matter, but they don't matter a lot versus if we were to immerse them into a consciousness and awareness that they're in a super water conserving school, and therefore these solutions are viable and work. You see what I'm saying? So I thought maybe I might ask him if he can present to us for, 15 minutes or something on all that.
Okay. Seems reasonable. All right. Any questions for Ben? Nope, I don't see anyone on the Zoom call either that raising a hand. So we'll move on. I don't see Larry Bailey in the crowd. So we'll move on to Tommy, and if Larry shows up, we'll get to his report later on.
And as far as I know, there hadn't been anything changed legislatively since we met last time. None of the special session calls pertain to water or utilities, so.
No, what I was expecting from Larry was a follow-up. We were talking about the go-forward supply issues on the legal front, what he saw as in terms of whether it be GBRA, SAWs, or otherwise, what our legal hurdles were, and begin the process of identifying those so that we can work them into our analysis for the
Have a legislative strategy.
Yeah, and just
on the planning side, we obtained the map from EDC, Bernie Kendall County Economic Development Corporation. They put together a really nice map of the area with utilities on it. Kurt has that. We're going through it. The format it is is nice if you're looking at real estate. It's not necessarily the tool that we need. So we're looking at how to repurpose that. And I was having a visit with Milan earlier, and he was mentioning some different water districts and things in the area. I'm actually going to spend a little time picking his brain and make sure we've got a whole host of service area maps and that together to finalize the product for us. So
Okay. What do you figure time-wise before we have some to look
just
at?
a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe we can
Have it today, but we don't. So
All right. Maybe we can circulate it to everybody between now and the next meeting, and then get any comments, questions, and talk about it at the next meeting.
right. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Tommy.
All right.
Yeah. Anything else?
Nothing other than I might ask Mike Mann. Mike, any GIS data that you can help us with in this effort would be appreciated. The city can help us with in this effort would be appreciated. And it may be included in everything that Amy's already gotten and put together. So
We have not made our shape files public yet, but we do have a distribution system map that we can share.
okay,
That basically shows where our lines are.
okay,
It doesn't
Great.
have all the sizes and specifics and things for security reasons, but
sure, no, understood. Understood.
we can produce a map of where our lines are.
Well, and if we might impose on you to look at whatever we come up with in draft and make sure we've colored between the lines properly. And
Okay.
everything. You might say, that's not exactly right, or this should be a little bit different, and help us fine tune it. We'd appreciate that. So,
Okay.
thank you, sir.
Good. All right. Thank you, Tommy. Any questions for Tommy or how things are progressing on that front? I think we still had some neighbors we wanted to talk to regionally.
Has
Tommy.
Mark got his hand up, or is that?
I can't tell. I can't tell if that's where the cursor is. No, it's the cursor.
Oh.
Okay. I saw that so long, so that's what I was assuming is the cursor. All right. Any questions out there for Tommy? I don't see any here in the room.
Patrick, if I might, to Milan and Kurt and Ben, now that he's back, do you guys have a good inventory? The southern part of the county has a lot of recharge features in it. Do y'all have an inventory of that, of caves, recharge features? Milan, Ben, Kurt?
I'm telling you, the short answer is yes. The dilemma, as you well know, is publicizing it. And we're very sensitive to publicizing issues that affect people's
Right.
property rights and private property. And there's their right to maintain that. However, we have collected quite a bit. We're collecting more. We have commissioned a study from James Beach. We intend to have that completed by the end of the year. We're hoping there'll be some recharge information coming from that also. Also, I did watch Dr. Venny's presentation. That seems to indicate a large concentration of recharge features in Civil, which you well know. But the point is, that to answer your question, yes, there's a lot of data. The challenge is how to release it to the general public in respect to private property rights.
Okay, thank you.
Good enough?
Yeah, good enough. Well, I just wonder aloud. It's obviously recharge is a crucial component, both in quantity and quality, to groundwater. And does it owns a place in this discussion, I guess is the simplest way to say it. As we look at water, and I know you're going to talk about conservation, and maybe you're going to get to that, but looking at recharge and how we protect those, both quality and quantity, I think are an important part of what we do.
If I may add, we have walked down that road relentlessly over the years, the quality road. The problem is Chapter 36 doesn't give us a whole lot of support. If I'm not mistaken, it gives one reference to water quality. We have tried to march on that battle, have been met with better adversaries. However, we're not done, and we'll continue to evolve and advance, advocate for that quality issue based on the data that we can accumulate.
And relative to all statutory powers and anything that the county or the city may or may not have, raising awareness to that is important. Just it'll change the public's perceptions, and that may be the greatest thing that we can do from any conversation about it.
Well, I totally agree.
Until they get the law changed. So
It's that education aspect.
Yes.
Frankly, I've been astounded over the years when I've learned about how limited we are collectively as a community, whether it's the city or the county or the conservation district, P&Z, for example, what you can actually do and what you cannot do. So working around those margins, we try to advocate. We continue to advocate.
all right. Thanks, Milan. Appreciate that.
And of course, and Milan, I don't want to keep you running back and forth, but you're up next anyway, so.
Oh, okay.
We can just transition and let you lead off. That way you don't have to go back and forth
Cool,
to the chair.
okay. I'm happy to stand up here all morning if possible.
And we're happy to have you, so thank you so much
No
for making
threats,
time.
man, no threats.
Just to let you guys know, I just got a note from the folks in Austin. They said they'll be on at 10 a.m., so we'll have to dance around the agenda.
We'll do what we need to do. All right.
Okay,
So
good
the
deal.
floor is yours, Milan.
Have a PowerPoint can be queued up? And do I drive from over here? Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. And it's a real pleasure to be here this morning. I've been wanting to come before the committee for quite a while. Opportunity has not presented itself. Most of you all know I work full-time as a logistician at Randolph. Airplanes are my passion. So maintenance, logistics, life cycle management, those type of things. So I'm a maintainer by training, but I'm a logistician by experience and profession. And I've been studying water since 2007, actually 2006 timeframe. I'll go back to thank Tommy Matthews for introducing me to water when I used to be the lone public participant at the Cow Creek meeting. And after about 2 years of him hearing me, we had a vacancy, and Tommy said, we can appoint you to the board. And that was in 2007.
Yeah.
So I hope you're happy with what you created.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Oh, you betcha. I want to spend, sorry, next chart here. Let's see. Uh-oh. Arrow keys? Not working. There you go. Thank you very much. Okay, so as a quick overview, I want to talk about state water planning at the state level, but primarily at the regional level, and Kirk Campbell will appreciate this. I want to talk a little bit about water history, only because I think it's very important to understand where we've been, because I think if you want to predict the future, look at the past. That water history you'll see in an attachment to your package are 10 pages, 5 different articles that I've been lucky enough to have a column in the Hill Country Weekly. So if you missed those, they are in chronological order. And the 5th one is not to be published yet, but will be next, about the general water history of the city of Bernie and the local area. The history, I think, is really important because it presents opportunity. Maybe do things a little bit differently. And I'm not a big jokester. I don't like to tell jokes, and it's probably because of my logistics background. I'm going to throw a little quote up here, though. My logisticians are a humorous lot. They know if my campaign fails, they are the first ones I will slay. Alexander the Great. So I'm not afraid of what's happening, but I'm respectful of what happens if logisticians fail. It's not an option, especially in the military. Part one of these 4 articles that I mentioned was published on June 11th. It was the first recognition of the first water plan in 1961. The state had a population of about 10 million. Following up with 1968 up to the year 2020. In 1985, interestingly, was a problem for the planners. They thought they were going to need more water. In fact, they'll need a whole lot more water. There was a plan to develop two surface channels, conveyance systems, one across North Texas and one across the Gulf area from the Mississippi to scarf off floodwaters. Problem was it was extremely expensive, 62 reservoirs, a lot of power to push that water, about 4,000 feet uphill. In fact, 7 million kilowatts of electricity, and nuclear power plants were involved. Put for the citizens, and it failed in the constitutional election by about 6,000 votes.
Wow.
And if you got any questions along this way, stop me at any time. I allotted for about 15 minutes, so if I talk fast, that's why.
Oh, you're good, man.
Okay.
You got plenty of time.
Oh, I'll slow down. I got 38 charts I can brief.
Keep on
I've
keeping
got
on.
skinny down to 9. In your package, there'll be the backup charts, which you find interesting. May find interesting from the photographs and some statistics and whatnot. So we're into July 9th of 2021, and a quick fact that came out of the Texas Water Plan, the state water plan, was the population increases expected to be 73% between 2020 and 2070. Now, you're all aware of the population increases, but I think what was interesting to me was the most of the growth, about half of it in region C and H. Obviously, we're in region L, but C being the Dallas-Fort Worth area and the Houston Houston general area under H. So half that growth in those 2 areas. Water management strategies from that particular regional plan factored heavily in conservation. In fact, 29% of all recommended water management strategies feature conservation by 2070. And we're moving forward that very quickly here locally, which is very pleasant to see, to be honest with you. And then the last bullet talks about future water sources. In 2020, only about 4% of that water is being reused in Region C, which is kind of interesting. That's one of the biggest population demands. Why is there not more emphasis on reclaimed water? And I will acknowledge that Bernie is leading, as far as I'm concerned, the fleet on what recycled water application and usages and investment. Of course, by the end of the entire state, those water supplies from reclaimed waters could reach 15% by 2070. I think that number could be much higher. That's my personal opinion. Okay, next chart speaks to the 19th of August, and I tried to put an approach toward local application. What's in this regional plan for Kendall County? And realizing this is a Bernie community water planning committee, still we looked within the boundaries of Kendall County when I wrote this. Again, an interesting statistic: most of the growth in Region L, Bear County, almost 60% in the region. I think that's a significant number. Obviously, we'll be frightened by the numbers in Hayes and Comal County, and of course Kendall County, where we could see numbers of 100,000 in the future, long distance future, but future nonetheless. And then I thought this was interesting, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but water planners in the regional level are not projecting an increase, a need for drinking water increases up until planning year 2050 for the city of Bernie. Now, realizing you guys are more proactive, this is a water plan, this is a regional plan. It takes 6 years to put it together, 5 years to put it together. So populations change, availability changes, I understand that, but nonetheless, what the public sees when they read these facts, okay, 20-year, 2050, could be 28,000 people. That's when the water need occurs for drinking water. And then I touched on it before, but to offset that need for more water, the city's working hard to increase the existing supply of non-potable water through reuse and direct application in Esperanza and the ranches at Creekside. Wanted to summarize in the fourth article, and in fact, it'll come out this 16th of September. Just to round everything up, obviously water conservation is recommended for every water user group, or WUG. There are more. There are ag and mining groups, as you all well know. But the point is that there are established gallons per capita per day, daily metrics. So it's very interesting. It's a real good point of departure from having a measurable and a acknowledged baseline, which was established back in 2011. So again, regional water planners are a little bit dated, but it is dated nonetheless. Interestingly enough, Comfort's WCID number 1 had the lowest gallon per capita day, only 94 gallons. County other, like myself, 118, and then Kendall West Utilities used 120. Bernie was recorded at 201, for what it's worth. I also want to point out that to fix some of these shortfalls or increase the water, make it last longer, use less drinking water, Water Development Board prioritizes funding through the SWIFT program. And Bernie's reuse program project ranked 37 out of 58 projects. Number 1 project was the GBRA Lower Basin project, and the capital costs are just quite incredible, I think, $65 million. SAWS has another project for a direct recycle pipeline, and it's coming in about $9.5 million. To back up Bernie's estimate for a reclaimed water plant, $9 million. It was based on a uniform cost model, so it's obviously pretty low. I've seen other information that says that's going to be a much bigger project, much higher capital cost. And let's see, scoot right along here. I want to touch on a very, very, very short history of water in Kendall County. Going back to 1949, the Chamber of Commerce published a pamphlet that mentioned the city had a modern municipal water system supplied by deep wells, which is furnishing an adequate supply of pure water for all legitimate purposes. And it was also caveated as being endless. Well, at that same time frame, there were 2 wells operated by the city. One was drilled in 29, the other in 45. Both were only 40 feet deep. And I think they're at the end of the town square next to the Cibolo Creek, so they were probably drawing water out of the Cibolo. So that was kind of interesting. 195,000 gallons on the summer demand supported 1940s population of about 1,200. 78, of course, we'd had a dam on Cibolo Creek that also created an opportunity for a new water treatment plant, and then to augment the city wells, which are a total of 9 today. We also brought in out-of-county water in 2006 from Canyon through GBRE's pipeline. August 9, 2016, Bernie Starr reported over the 4-day period that demand of water peaked at an all-time high. This is happening several times lately, all-time highs, even with all sources combined. Subsequently, 2 years later, immediate advisory went out by the city, and it announced the city's intent to increase water from GBRA, which was prudent. And unfortunately, a new record for potable water production was set, over 100 million gallons, eclipsing the 2017 record of 99 million. And then lastly, I wanted to record that in July of 2021, reclaimed water demand exceeded the utilities' capacity to deliver it, and that also surfaced in city council and local papers to be included the City of San Antonio and Express News. This really comes to the theme I'm trying to bring to all this discussion when I talk about water. There's only so much to go around. And it sounds simplistic, but I think Senator Perry summed it up really good in the interim report delivered by the Senate Committee on Rural and Water Affairs last year. And I'll just quote from it. The State Water Plan, SWP, works in conjunction with a regulatory framework that is meant to protect the taking by legal or illegal means of one area to give it to another to the unrecoverable detriment of the source of that water. However, moving water from one region to another does not create more water supply overall. Only the impoundment of water currently not captured in reservoirs and diversion, conversion of existing water to potable standards, which is marine, brackish, and produced water, desalinization, reduced evaporation technologies, and God can add to the usable water supply. Conservation and reuse play a vital role in the extension of the available supply, but does not add to the overall availability water supply. And I've included a reference if you all want to look it up. It's a really comprehensive report. There are other good quotes in there as well. Highly recommend a read of that. And then closing thoughts. I want to foot stomp that the water conservation was recommended for each one of the water groups in the Janel plan. And it emphasized the gallon per capita day metric and goal, which certainly seems to be achievable by me. Secondly, to offset the need for more drinking water right now, City of Bernie plans to increase its existing supply of non-potable direct-to-use water. Very good thing, because what we're not using goes into the creek and disappears downstream. Another good thing, recharge. Nonetheless, we have paid for the water here. We think we get a better return on investment on it by keeping it and keeping it local. And lastly, I want to leave the thought that thinking about water conservation with less actually being more. There's the tendency to build bigger, get more, make it go further. And I'm not saying ignore those opportunities, but it seems to me from a conservation perspective, especially from a conservation district and an individual consumer, I try to use less. And that's a small number to begin with, but when you multiply that times a lot of people doing more with less, it adds up. And I think it's a real good way to end this presentation. Again, there's a series of backup slides if you want to look through those photographs and some observations, ways of using drinking water better and reclaimed water better, in my view.
And frankly, that's one of the reasons I want to delve a little bit deeper with you. I certainly do. Thank you first for coming and making the time, Milan. If you would stay at the podium, I know we're going to want to ask you some questions. I will. Before we transition into that, Christina, would you make sure we have those articles made available electronically so we can post them on the website?
Sure. You want me to send them to you?
That'll be just fine. Me or Ben, either one. Ben's the boss of the website. I can spell website. That's about
Actually,
it.
I think I already have them because I think Milan sent them to me last night or this
I
morning.
scanned every one of them and put them in a package to send with this. So I'd save some work. If you want to do that, that's good.
If you've got them in a non-PDF format, that'll probably make it more functional for Ben to use, though, Christina.
Oh, okay.
Whatever.
That just in terms of the manipulation and putting them on the website so people can access them better, and we're not worried about the quality of the copy. So I'd appreciate that. I wanted to know, Lon, I know that you this is more than a hobby for you. You are deeply invested, and we appreciate your study of this area and its importance in our community. You've looked at a lot of conservation efforts. What are your thoughts in terms of things that may or may not work well here that are going on? Because we're in a stage right now where we've been tasked with doing two key things and hopefully putting those at least into some written format to help the city council take some direction going forward. And we're looking at supply side things and conservation things. Those are the two great big elephants in the room. And save what we've got and see whether or not we can get more at some point in time and what both of those look like. So with your background, I'm interested to see what you've come across from a conservation standpoint that you think would be effective, that you've seen work elsewhere. I mean, as you know, we're looking to SAWS. We're looking anywhere there's a good idea, we want to hear about it. And so we want to have you share whatever you think might work.
Of course. And I was fortunate enough to have tuned in the last meeting with Karen Guz from SAWS, made an excellent presentation and emphasized things like education and encouragement. And when you have to, penalize, but use it sparingly. But you want to get the public's cooperation on your side. And that goes back to where we started this conversation, which is about education. The more you can give to the public in a way that they can understand it and accept it. Nobody's telling you what to do, but there's a better way to do it. This is how you can advocate. These are things you can do that'll lower your bill, but it'll also make water in the community go further. And I'll circle back to SAWS for a moment. The one observation I would make about it is that was from a large city. As we heard earlier, the population in the future account for 60% of the population. Bernie and people in Kendall County, there's a different audience, we put it that way. And we're focused on, or you all are focused on Bernie as a community. I look at Kendall County from a 40,000-foot view. Bernie's got what, half the population?
19,000, just over 19,000.
We're bumping up against 40 in the county. So half the county is dependent upon wells, rainwater systems.
Right.
Notwithstanding 2 MUDs and a couple of 4 WCIDs. There's another strategy there. But to answer your question, give you a straight answer, focus on Kendall County, the uniqueness of Kendall County, take leads from a successful conservation program from SAWS, but also recognize the audience is different. And I think I know that obviously the climate is different, whether it's the geology or the weather, or flood or whatever it is, it's a little bit different up here. And the other thing I want to continue to hammer home that there are all alternatives to using imported surface water or drilling more wells. And it's small, again, the rainwater harvesting, reuse of gray water systems in individual homes and businesses, those type of approaches. It's nothing magical, but again, I'll go back to my logistics background. I was just slugging up the big things. Look at life cycle management and 50 years down the road. How would we get there with a fleet of airplanes? And how are we going to get there with a network of water? Where's it coming from? Now, I'll go back to what Senator Perry pointed out. There's no more water. We just move it from one place to another. Unless you put it in a reservoir or you put it in a tank where it does not evaporate, which is the key, I think. It's evaporation losses. You can put it in Bernie Lake, great lake, but it evaporates. You can bring it from Canyon, but it evaporates too. But you put it in a water tank, it stays in that tank generally until you use it. And then, of course, when you adopt those, one other point I wanted to make, statistically, Water Development Board will tell us that, or us as a population community, about 30% of the water in this area is used outdoors. And of that, about half of that's wasted. It's either running off down the streets or overwatering. So this goes back to something else that SAWS talked about, was technology. There are technological advances that can help a homeowner use that water more appropriately in their landscape if they have to have a lawn, which again, I'll go back to give Bernie credit. The UDC, 10 years ago, water planning acknowledged limited turf or a specified turf that used less water. So if we can get the culture to change in the community to adapt those less intensity uses outdoors, that would stretch the water a whole lot further down the road. And I don't believe in bleak landscapes. I love native plants, I love buffalo grass, but I don't water my yard because the deer eat it, it'll freeze, or the drought will kill it. But nonetheless, that's an education process. It's a cultural change. Same thing we deal in the military. We got to change the culture. Using too much power, costs too much, and we use too much fuel. Well, how do we cut those back? Well, efficiency. But it doesn't have to be draconian. It's small. It's incremental. That goes back to the gallon per capita per day metric. It's measurable, and it's established. And it seems to me a really good point of departure for a city to glom onto. And we haven't even talked about Fair Oaks Ranch. A whole different kettle of fish down there. As I understand, they've been included in the process, which is a good thing, by the way.
And we're seeing Fair Oaks as hopefully will be represented here in a more robust way.
I know I rambled for a little bit. I hope I answered your question. I'll
So-
to give you more comprehensively in paper. I'm better writing something down than talking about it because I can run it off with the mouth. It's very.
Be careful. You might get a job.
New job.
I would love to. Yes, I would love to participate more. Obviously, my time is constrained. I have to work for a living. One of these days, I'll retire, and I do this for fun.
So one of the things that, you're talking about turf grass and all that stuff, and I noticed Comfort, I think you said, is at something like 93 and 96 GPCD per day, whatever. And I don't see a lot of irrigation going on in Comfort at all. And I wonder if that's the big determinant of that success.
I agree.
Yeah.
Something else is interesting. The other thing I study is, Patrick, water control and improvement districts, municipal utility districts. That district was created in 1947 just to supply water and wastewater services. It was never designed as they are used today as development tools, financing tools to build subdivisions. There were people there. I've got the original documentation. It's fascinating how they developed this thing and how they gave up tax money to give water and wastewater treatment to people who lived within certain boundaries, not those who would come in the future. But to Ben's point, Mike and I talk about this periodically, and it seems to be lack of outdoor water use. Why?
We talked about it last night at the meeting. It came up just for a little bit, but they run ahead of us on the drought stages. They're usually quicker to get to the higher stages. I think it may just be a culture of more conservation and more sensitivity to their needs for water out there compared to where maybe we're less sensitive to it because we think we have more water down here than they do.
Right. I think there's a cultural difference over
That's exactly
the
right.
Comfort area. I mean, it's water is a precious resource and it's treated like one more often than not.
It's limited. It's treated differently, and there are different demands on it. I mentioned earlier the reading your audience. When somebody talks to the city of San Antonio and somebody talks to Bernie or somebody talks to the county, it's different audiences. But in Kendall County and Bernie, the audience should be comparable. But that's a real good distinction, Kurt. Yeah, so they're different. They treat water differently. They have been short of water. They run low on water pressure periodically. They've worked to fix it, but they have a different circumstance.
Milan, what was the source where did you get the per capita data? Because our number looks way higher than anything I've ever seen.
Well, that's why I was hesitant to throw on the table. I tried to introduce this as what's in the public record. It's in the Regional Water Plan, Volume 2. I'll send you the direct reference. You kind of surprised me, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And admittedly, I think the Water Development Board would tell you, I've heard Dr. Mace talk about this, and he's big on the calculation. It becomes depends how you look at it. The raw calculation is population divided by the water consumed.
Right.
Well, that could be misleading, and I admittedly say that. But to answer your question, it's in the Volume 2 Regional L Plan.
Okay, we'll check it out because it is a lot bigger than what we normally report or see.
I agree, but I nonetheless had to make an observation of it.
It's what's in the report.
Yeah, they're far voice. I don't know if you're familiar with the Garden Ridge area. Garden Ridge is over 300.
Oh, yeah.
And right across the horizon from them is a Seven Hills Ranch, for example, is a KT water supplied system. Same thing, about 300 gallons per day. It's like, you gotta be kidding me. And I've seen higher numbers for other areas, Cordillera Ranch, for example. The numbers are out there, but again, I guess to give you a straight answer, it depends on how you calculate that number. And there's a standard formula, but I think it has, well, admittedly, it can be misleading. But the gallon per capita per day, I think the potential reduction is tangible. If that's a number, okay, we can get that number down real fast.
Right, exactly. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I just wanted to compare to what we calculate, which is usually more in the 140, 150 range, so.
And what would be throwing that off? Is it because of irrigation going on at city parks or,
Yeah, I don't know what time frame that was. If that's
2011,
It's the whole.
that's part of it. They were all baseline in 2011.
11.
Yeah, so we're talking a decade ago.
Okay.
So there's some caveats to go with the answer, to give a straight one.
All right, well, so then the other question I had, so SAWS, you said they had some direct recycle pipeline. It was like 9 million, not a whole lot.
What are
What are they doing? Yeah.
There's there are a number of projects. I just picked out two that stuck out because that represents a part of the system and where they rank in funding from SWIFT.
Okay.
There's a whole laundry list. It's it's an Excel spreadsheet, and the Water Development Board rates them numerically by project, like viability and cost, those kind of things, come up with a numerical rating, which is how it falls in there. But the point was that you would think it'd be a high priority here because there is a way to use less drinking water by recycling more. But in this rank and stack, it falls midway. And there are other higher priorities which are focused on Bear County, unfortunately.
And then the other question I had for you is, I know you have reservations about the interbasin transfer related to essentially SAWS acquiring more water out of Lee and Mason counties from the Vista Ridge pipeline, and then obviously they would sort of rob Peter, pay Paul, take the excess supply that they would have from Edwards Aquifer, shift it up toward Kendall County, and I know you have reservations about that. Could you talk to that a bit? Or?
Well, I'll go back to the 97 timeframe when the EAA was established. It was established for a specific reason, to keep Edwards water in a geographically defined area, to manage that water, to maintain spring flow, which, as Tommy well knows, that's the linchpin to your system.
Exactly.
All right. And that is that's by law. And with the efforts to take some of that water and move it into a county outside the boundaries, to me, that corrupts the water management strategy that the legislature put in place. Just because, not to use that as an example, but Vista Ridge, just because I got another water source doesn't mean I should all of a sudden change the law and say, I don't need that water, just send it out here. That seems to me not logical. And it seems to be not sustainable, because sooner or later the Edwards water has to be curtailed. Now, what if people are hooked up to a water supply from the Edwards in a good year? Then we get into a situation of a drought of record, a 5-year extended drought, which we already know the drought of record really isn't the drought of record. We came close from 2011 to 2015 to exceeding the drought of record by population increase and drought impacts and those type of things. So once again, I didn't give you a straight answer, but my sensitivity personally would be to maintain the integrity of the EAA and its boundaries, and observe that if one were to take water outside the boundaries, get the legislature to buy off on it, then the legislature is going to have to accommodate people that run short of water when that supply is cut down. I think it creates a different risk factor. And risk factors, by the way, you may be aware of this or not, but in 2015, the city of San Antonio, through then Councilman Nirenberg, commissioned a water policy analysis. And that analysis is full of projects and the risks associated with them. Availability, contamination, cost, and those type of things. And that's another thing I would highly recommend. If you haven't already looked at it, take a look at it. Problem is, it ends in Fair Oaks Ranch. Kind of stuck them in the eye a little while ago. Didn't mean to, but Fair Oaks Ranch and the city of San Antonio partnered to produce this report. We all know that once you get across the Cibolo, underground, what's changed.
Yeah.
And I've always wondered about that. So that's another thing I followed closely, is that particular report the genesis of the initial report, which was in good faith. The councilman, District 8, wanted to understand water in his part of Bear County. Then he became the mayor, and then it took on a whole different aspect, which I hate to say this, then it becomes political. And I just moved off of where I wanted to stay this morning, which is to be objective, just to look at historical applications, look at local policy perhaps, and not get tangled up in regional policy. And I don't mind doing that, but my focus has been Kendall County, try to help in Bernie where I can, and recognize that there are restrictions to water moved outside of Bear County and the EAA. And I go back to moving it out of that area and getting on that tap, I think has liability in the future when those supplies are not available for whatever reason.
Well said.
Oh, thank you.
Well said. And it comes with a price. It comes with a
Yeah.
price outside of that, too. Because to support that high-end water creates a lot of density and creates some other impacts that I don't know that we have them well quantified or well understood. So,
No, and
I don't want to belabor that point, but I want to go to another point before I forget it. And Jeff may be able to chime in, or Daryl, or even Mike on this. You know, when Ms. Goose was here last month talking to us, she was talking about using air conditioner condensate. Is there any data out there, studies relative to capture commercial air conditioner condensate through the wastewater system and how much that can increase recycled water availability?
We haven't done any studies, Tom, but I'm sure that they're out there. You know, there was a time that building codes didn't allow it.
Right.
Because you didn't want to inundate wastewater plants. That's more flow, which means typically more discharge and therefore more plant capacity. So there's an ebb and flow on, I mean, some are connected, some are not. I'll see what kind of data.
I would think it would create not only more flow, but less predictability in the volume. We're going to have a much higher volume during summertime and in humid times than we have, in terms of flow in the winter and fall months and early spring. So, I don't know what that does relative to the operation of those wastewater facilities. I'm sure it's not a steady state condition, but there's some variability that makes operations the same. And when you get outside of that range of variability, it creates some other problems for you. So,
I would suspect, given our lack of industry here, the cumulative amount of condensate that we receive is very small, but any little bit helps, right?
right.
Mike, didn't the Champion High School start with
That's
that?
it, yes.
They did.
Into their on-site recycling?
On-site water storage,
Yeah.
which is backed up by stormwater runoff, which is backed up by city water.
And there's a huge presentation. I'm sure Jeff's seen it. Like you have it all on here. When they designed that system, and to use condensation to the max availability. Personal use, I collect condensate out of the air conditioner. And about the only time I don't get any condensate is when it's freezing outside. There's always some moisture in the air, it seems like.
Yeah.
And on a day like the last couple of weeks, I'm getting eight gallons a day. And one liability I found out over the years, I never understood why when I go out to Bonnert's Lumber, there were cattle troughs made out of galvanized metal. They're all corroded. Well, I put one of those troughs underneath the condensate many, many years ago. It corroded. And I realized it's because the water is pure water. It reacts with the galvanized material, and it breaks it down. So it never occurred to me. So now I collected the plastic bins.
Yeah.
Anyway. But I know there are studies available. SAWS is looking at this real heavily for their industrial use down around what used to be Kelly Field and Port San Antonio. They're considering to spend a lot of money to develop that particular resource. It starts small, and we do have a little bit of industry, but we got schools. Each one of those schools, and I would use Champion as a model to extrapolate rooftop student capacity, air-conditioned capacities. And I think if you could get numbers out of Champion, you could multiply those exponentially by, as we well know, a lot of school data. So maybe not industry, but gosh, a whole lot of schools with air conditioning systems.
we probably should talk to Champion and see if they're still using their system. You know, the issue with all of the rainwater catchment and the condensate catchment and all those things is it takes maintenance. And, you know, folks are used to being able to turn on the tap and get city water without the need for maintenance.
Right.
If you have your own production and pumping resources, you've got to maintain it.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of those things go by the wayside. I'll talk to Champion or BISD and see if they're still using it.
And I would volunteer, it goes back to that cultural change. I think if people knew what it was costing in new water supplies, potentially new water supplies, or energy costs, and to your point, back to logistics, we buy a fleet of airplanes. The airplanes themselves are cheap, relatively, notwithstanding F-35, F-22. A basic trainer, buy a fleet of 350 airplanes, $9 billion. Okay, well, you keep it for 30 years. That 30-year cost is going to be 70% of your acquisition cost. The money's not in buying the airplane; it's maintaining it. And similarly, as Mike pointed out, it's the operations and maintenance costs. Who's going to change the filters? Who's going to keep up with the pumps, the pipes, all those kind of things? And it should all be factored into a cost model. Is it really affordable? I think it is, but to be determined.
Like I say, it's cultural, and certainly we've seen from Ms. Guzman's presentation and from others that there are a lot of common sense things, even from a construction go-forward basis. We should start being more mindful of available technologies and trying to rope those in and just use what we have, just be smarter about it. That's done on a gross scale with two-gallon flushes or, changing up shower heads and other things like that. But I think we're going to have to dig a little deeper. And whether or not, culture change takes, 20 years, something like that, typically. So you got to start somewhere. But that's part of what we hope to accomplish is to identify things that might make good sense, and then those powers that be will decide to do it or not do it. But
personally, I like taking a holistic approach, and one of the articles that I've written, it addresses what you just described, active and passive conservation, and how just improved plumbing fixtures to reflect modern standards decrease the water required. Then, of course, there are other people that you want to incentivize to change out old fixtures that may be in the house for 50 or 60 years. That's an incentivized part. That costs money. And then bottom line is, to Patrick's point, the change in the culture. Our conservation district, Cow Creek, uses 3 C's. Conserve, capture, and clean. Okay? I heard SAWS. I can't remember the third one, but I would say educate, encourage. There's the third, but I can't think. I'm not clever to think of it right now. But just look at it holistically in the education process and talk to people. And I mentioned schools earlier. There's a heck of an opportunity to educate children about where their future water will come from and where their water today is coming from.
Well, I'm a child of the 60s, and I remember the predictions that we would be on the backside of the oil supply curve by 1973. And that we needed to plan accordingly. And interestingly, technology expanded supply. And it's expanded supply through conservation and more efficiency and capture and horizontal drilling and all that types of things that open us up to additional reserves of oil and gas. And to some degree, technology helps us through conservation and efficiency expand supply, better leverage it on that gallons per day per capita type of metric over time. But very interestingly, the simplest technologies are the oldest technologies. And you see cisterns at old farms and collecting water off of barns and low flow wells. And that's functionally a big piece of today's rainwater capture. Mm-hmm. You see landscaping now, as we talked about this last month, we're starting to look at landscaping around the house from a fire standpoint, but also from a fire break standpoint, and minimalizing it, which is what happened 100 years ago. You did it for a different set of reasons, but you did it. So, and people, we are the lowest tech thing. Our habits and our practices are the simplest way. Milan, you're a great example of it. You always have been. In terms of conserving water. You said 300 gallons per day. I'm sitting here thinking, I don't think we use 300 gallons a week at the house. I bet you don't either.
How did I say that?
300 gallons per day for somebody,
For Garden Ridge.
Bracket.
Oh, yeah, I don't get that at all.
Yeah, I bet you're like us, we probably don't use 300 gallons in a week.
That's right. Exactly right. That's what's to address the cultural approach. When you embrace these strategies, these technologies, these back to basics, everything comes down naturally, and you adapt, and you don't even realize it. And oh, by the way, you have less pain on landscapes. You're not putting fertilizers in the ground. I'm an organic gardener also, so organics, and then also there's that time you're spending maintaining the yard. I love to piddle around in the yard, but I'd rather not be working 2 days out of the week cutting grass. Okay, so there's a leisure thing that's also exposed when you change that. It goes back to the outdoor use. That's the easy 30% right there. But you're not going to dictate that to people. No, what I want to do that. It's an individual choice. And then of course there's a revenue stream that enters into this also. So it's a balance in the city. Right. County a little bit different, but you're exactly right, Tommy. I'm a product of the mid-50s, but
Did you include beer in that calculation, Tommy?
What's that?
Did you include beer in your calculation?
No, not beer. That's extra water.
That's returned back to the environment.
It's just water.
That's important.
Interproperty transfer.
Lon, I certainly appreciate coming and contributing, sharing this morning. Hope you'll continue to serve as a resource for us.
Of course. Anytime you need it, I don't want to interfere, but there are things I'd like to share. I'd like to share more often. You'll have it just as a take it or leave it. Here's a consideration. And I sincerely appreciate the opportunity and all this time you've given me this morning. I figured I'd get 10 minutes. Wow, this has been damn near an hour. So I'm very gracious for the time and the questions. This conversation has been fantastic. And again, thankful to the Hill Country Weekly, the publisher in the back corner there, for giving me the opportunity to put these things down in print periodically. And they'll continue once a month. So thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, Mon. Appreciate it.
So we do have the Austin Water people online at this point. Shall I introduce them?
Oh, would you make the introduction, Ben?
Sure. And are you kind of maybe get them queued up? But anyways, we have Marissa Flores-Gonzalez and Janel Nicholson. And they're joining us from the city of Austin. Now, the Austin Water Forward Plan is basically the city of Austin realized, they have water constraints. 2011 hit. It kind of scared the heck out of them as they saw Lake Travis dropping out. And they decided, well, we need to come up with a plan that allows us to live within our means as the population grows and potential future droughts strike. So I felt like that they're a good municipality to keep an eye on as far as conservation and reuse solutions. And I've asked them to, since we had such a great presentation from Karen Guz, I've asked Austin about conservation. I've asked Austin to talk about, some conservation, but also a lot of the reuse strategies. And with that, I'll turn it over to, it looks like Marissa Flores-Gonzalez is ready for us. And hi, Janelle, I see you too.
Hi, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Marissa Flores-Gonzalez. I'm the supervisor of the Water Resources team in the Systems Planning Division at Austin Water, and our group is responsible for short, medium, and long-range water supply and water resource planning. We led the development of the Waterford Integrated Water Resource Plan, and we're going to be leading the update to that plan here starting in January. And I'll give Janel just a moment to introduce herself as well.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Janel Nicholson, Program Manager for Austin Water on the Water Resources team with Marissa. I mainly focus on planning, research, and internal and external engagement. We're really excited to talk with you all.
Thanks to you both. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. So we're so excited to be here, and I was actually really pleased that I was able to sit in and hear some of the previous discussion you were having. It was a really interesting conversation and touches on some of the themes that we'll discuss in this presentation. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I think that'll work so that you can see this presentation. Okay. So we'll be discussing Water Forward, which is Austin's 100-year integrated water resource plan. Just for some background about Austin, Austin's water supply comes from a combination of state-granted water rights as well as a long-term firm contract with the Lower Colorado River Authority that firms up our water rights. We have access to up to 325,000 acre-feet of water per year from those combined sources when that water is available. And on the map, you can just see a picture of the location of the city of Austin in gray. And then I've got the lakes labeled there to the north and west of Austin. Lake Travis and Lake Buchanan are our major storage reservoirs. I imagine some of y'all are familiar with the city of Austin and the Highland Lakes, but it's just good to have a little bit of background on our sources of supply. Austin Water is a drinking water, wastewater, and reclaimed water utility. We have a fairly large service area of 548 square miles. The utility employs about 1,200 folks, and we serve a million plus customers with both water and wastewater service. Our total pumpage in FY20 was 157,000 acre feet, so about half of the amount of water that we have available to us in supplies. And our reclaimed water use through our centralized purple pipe system in FY20 was about 4,800 acre feet. Over time, Austin Water has implemented conservation programs that have brought down our GPCD from a high in fiscal year 1996 at 193 gallons per person per day, down to 120 gallons per person per day in FY19. In FY20, we did see a little uptick. We went up to 127 gallons per person per day, and the data is still pending on this year, but I think we'll be heading back down a few notches this year. You'll see on the chart there's a blue or a light blue arrow pointing up from FY 2007, which is a point at which City Council began strengthening our conservation programs. And then you'll also see in 2011 is when we had one last uptick in our GPCD, and then demand started declining quite rapidly. And that is in response to the conservation programs that we implemented and our drought contingency plan stages that were implemented in response to the 2011 drought. There was a decline, however, even from the late 90s and into the mid 2000s. And part of that decline was due to increased fixture efficiency, more efficient fixtures being available through the market. So this is a combination of both passive and active conservation efforts. Austin is subject to both floods and drought. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see a picture of an arm of Lake Travis during the 2011 drought, when there was literally no water. If you looked at this same arm of Lake Travis during a flooding event that we experienced in October of 2018, or any of the more recent flooding events, there have been instances where the water would be up to the top of the trees. So there's, we see these kind of fluctuations going back and forth, and with climate change, that's something that we expect to continue, just kind of this uncertainty about these extreme weather events. We also are experiencing fairly rapid population growth. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see a graph showing our historical population growth from 1915 to 2016 in blue, and then projected population growth. This chart was actually developed several years ago. Projected population growth was developed by our city demographer from 2017 to 2115. And our city demographer at the time projected that we would reach about 4 million people within the city of Austin in 100 years. That would mean, with a current population of a little under 1 million people, 3/4 of the people who would be here in 100 years, and the homes that they would live in, and potentially the businesses that they would work in, are not here yet. And that's something that we keep in mind as we think about how to create developments that are as efficient as possible, how we can create the opportunities now that are going to set us up for success in the future. So in response to the drought that we experienced in 2008 to 2016, and really prompted by the worst year of that drought in 2011, City Council directed us to develop an integrated water resource plan. and Water Forward is the name that we gave to that integrated water resource plan. It was developed over the course of 3 years with input from our community, as well as a council-appointed citizen task force, and it was approved by City Council in November of 2018. Since that time, we've been in the process of implementing this plan. In the plan, we looked at both water supply and demand management strategies and evaluated those under future climate scenarios as well as future growth scenarios. Our process to develop the plan began with developing our methodology, developing our demand side and potential supply side options, characterizing those, so creating information about each of those options related to cost and yield and other factors, and then combining those options into a number of portfolios. We evaluated those portfolios and scored them, and the metrics and objectives that we scored them against were things like supply reliability, cost, environmental impacts, social benefits, implementation feasibility. And ultimately, the portfolio that was the top scoring portfolio formed the basis of our plan recommendations. And some of the guiding principles for the plan are shown on the right side of the screen, and they include protecting our core Colorado River supplies, public health and the environment, focusing on reliability, conservation, local resources, as well as feasible and implementable strategies, and aligning with our community's values, with our city's Imagine Austin comprehensive plan, as well as with the regional coordination that we do in terms of our partnership with the Lower Colorado River Authority, the entity that owns and operates the Highland Lakes, or the coordination that we do as part of the regional water planning process. We're a part of Region K, which is just up above Region L. And we set some goals for public outreach in developing this plan. We identified what community values were important to reflect in the plan. Things like conservation rose to the top, as well as being affordable and making sure that we had a reliable supply. Seeking input from stakeholders to reflect the diversity of Austin's population, and then informing and educating the community throughout the process. And the map on the right just shows you some of the physical locations where we had events, gave presentations, participated in town halls, or any other information sharing opportunity that we participated in during the plan development. It was a time when we could do things more easily in person. The Waterford strategies that we ultimately included in the plan can be grouped into these categories: reducing demand, moving reuse forward, protecting our core Colorado River supplies, and building resiliency. And that's all built on the foundation of continued stakeholder and community engagement. And I'll dive in a little bit more into the details of what these strategies contain. This might be a little bit small to read, so I can send this presentation afterwards if y'all are interested.
Please.
But this table shows the Waterford strategy yields. The demand management strategies here, D1 through D12, are really either ways we're reducing demand or we're supplementing potable supplies with non-potable supplies through on-site water reuse. And then S1 through S11 are water supply strategies that are either gaining additional supply or really storage strategies. Was somebody trying to say something I couldn't quite hear?
You just mentioned that you might be able to share your presentation after the meeting, and I welcome that, if you don't mind.
Sure thing. And I apologize. I don't know if it's just me, but it is kind of hard to hear the folks who are in person. So if you feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have a question, and I'll try to keep an ear out for that. Okay.
We'll let you know. We'll ask you questions as needed, so don't worry about that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so some of the key strategies on the demand management side that we have here are advanced metering infrastructure, so replacing our meters with smart meters, utility side water loss control, and then a slew of strategies here related to on-site water reuse. We've got lot-scale stormwater harvesting, rainwater harvesting, gray water harvesting, wastewater reuse as some of the key strategies within this plan moving forward. And then on the water supply side, our cornerstone water supply strategy is aquifer storage and recovery. By 2115, we are hoping to have 90,000 acre feet available to us per year from an ASR system. And we'll talk a little bit more about what steps we're taking right now to make that happen. All in all, when you add up our future, our projected demand savings from these strategies, as from conservation strategies as well as reuse strategies, we are hoping to reduce our future projected demands to a point in 2115 where we're still below 300,000 acre feet per year in demand for potable water supplies. That would mean that we would be below the current amount of water that's available to us from both our Colorado River rights and our contract with LCRA. That would be a wonderful outcome. You can see here that we've got the purple bar indicating our centralized and decentralized or on-site non-potable reuse demands, and then these gray areas or hatched areas are indicating our conservation savings. The blue is the remaining potable water demand. When we talk to folks, though, we try to emphasize that even if we're able to reduce our demands to still fit into the water supplies that are available to us today, we need to have backup storage and backup supplies available to us so that 100 years in the future, if we are facing additional uncertainty due to weather and climate, we're able to draw on those supplies to see us through potentially a drought worse than the drought of record. So just kind of going back to some of the key strategies in our plan, protecting our core Colorado River supplies through our participation in the regional water planning process will continue to be really important to us, and coordinating with other users in the basin through our partnership with the Lower Colorado River Authority. The Colorado River will continue to be a cornerstone supply for the city of Austin moving forward. We're very blessed to have that supply available to us, and we want to do everything that we can to protect that supply moving forward. Our smart water meter system, which we've called MyATX Water, is another important strategy that we're working to implement right now. We have a plan to replace about 250,000 water meters throughout our system by FY 2025. We have just started that process. To date, we've installed about 11,700 meters. And as we're installing those meters, we're also rolling out a customer portal so folks can get access to that customer portal through an app on their phone or also through their desktop computer, and they can either get notifications that show anomalous water use, or they can get information about how their water use compares to other customers of similar development types. We're also working to implement ordinances and codes related to alternative water. Right now, we have a voluntary on-site water reuse program that's in effect. We're calling it voluntary because there's a phase in the future where we will be requiring that very large buildings that are greater than 250,000 square feet will be required to install an on-site water reuse system. That could be something like rainwater harvesting, that could be something like on-site black water reuse, but they will be required to install that type of system to offset a significant portion of their non-potable water demand. Right now, the voluntary portion of this program is an incentivized program. So we have an incentive that's available to very large developments to try to encourage them to install these types of systems. And we have also instituted what we call a regulatory framework that's regulating the design, permitting, construction, and maintenance of these systems as they go in. Because one thing, I heard someone mention this earlier in the discussion, one thing that we learned from other utilities is that to get continued savings from these types of systems, you have to make sure that they are both designed and constructed properly, and that they're also maintained properly. We want to see that continued savings and not have this kind of a stranded investment. So that's we're putting a lot of effort in trying to make sure that this regulatory program is as robust as possible, while also streamlined to make things easier on the developer side. Since we're trying to understand how to make this as effective as possible, Austin Water is also doing our own on-site water reuse pilot. We have what we call Oscar and Clara. Oscar stands for On-Site Collection and Reuse, and Clara stands for Closed Loop Advanced Reclaimed Assembly. But Oscar and Clara are a new blackwater reuse system that's that has gone into our new permitting and development center for the city. It's installed underneath this little walkway here, so that's a treatment system that you can see underneath it's kind of a gathering space and walkway area between the building and the parking garage. This system reuses the wastewater that is generated on site in the permitting and development center, treats that to a type 1 non-potable reclaimed water standard, and then pumps that back into the building to be used for toilet flushing and urinal flushing. It's also an opportunity for us to gather a lot of data about this type of system, to see how it can, to learn what we need to learn about how it's operated and maintained, and it's also a showcase for us so that our development community can see at the building that they come to interact with us how this type of system is possible. We are also putting in place, or we're hoping to seek council approval here, I think it's September 30th, for a benchmarking calculator to be included with new site plans that are submitted for new developments, all new developments. The benchmarking calculator would gather information that a engineer or architect is already generating as part of the site plan. It would take that information into the calculator, and then it would shoot out an estimate of potable demand and non-potable demand, indoor and outdoor. And one of the beautiful things about it is that it can help us to identify conservation and efficiency opportunities, but it also allows us to identify potential opportunities for potable water demand to be offset by a non-potable strategy like on-site water reuse or our centralized reclaim system. And then we're also looking at how we can build out and implement our centralized and decentralized reclaim systems. Map on the left is kind of grainy, but our centralized reclaim system is shown in here in purple. You can kind of see the extent of that system. We're really focusing on some of the downtown areas with that system, but over towards the east is where we're thinking that we will have potentially decentralized reclaim facilities. So what you would typically call satellite or package wastewater treatment plants that would have a reclaim distribution system attached to them to serve something at the neighborhood scale. And this would be separate and apart from the centralized reclaim system. The little graph here on the bottom right-hand corner just shows how over time we see the pie as a whole growing, and that's supposed to represent our overall water demands. This chart shows from 2020 to 2040, 2070, and 2115. The gray portion of the chart is showing drinking water or potable water supply meeting non-potable demand, and the purple portion shows non-potable supply meeting non-potable demand. The blue portion of the chart is really just your potable demand. So over time, we want to shrink that gray portion of the graph and until we can see a much larger portion of our non-potable demand being met by non-potable supplies. It's called a type of fit-for-purpose approach, where you're trying to meet the appropriate water demand with the appropriate water quality. And like I mentioned, aquifer storage and recovery is also in our plan, and it is a cornerstone supply. We are currently in the pilot phase of this project. Right now, we're working on identifying where to pilot using desktop modeling. From FY24 through 27 is when we'll be designing, constructing, and testing an ASR pilot and developing recommendations for a full-scale ASR project. And then from FY28 and through FY35 is when we would be going through preliminary engineering and then construction of a full-scale ASR project. We hope to have that completed by FY35 so that we can go through several film refill cycles, have that go through the aquifer conditioning process, and then have storage available to us to meet our target goals by 2040. And looking forward, we continue to implement our planned strategies. We continue to collaborate and engage with other city departments and organizations within our city, as well as our broader community and other partners within the region and within the basin. And then we'll be updating this plan on a 5-year cycle. And so we are going to be starting that plan update here in January 2022. We were pushed back a little bit just because of the delay in the release of census data. And just as a peek into what that 2024 project plan will look like, we will go through the whole process again to refine our planning methodology, update our water demands, update our climate and hydrology analysis, identify what our needs are for the future for our 100-year planning horizon, identify strategies, put those into portfolios and evaluate our portfolios, and ultimately develop plan recommendations and document our adaptive management approach. The hope is to have that completed by January 2024 and then go forward with council approval.
Very cool.
And happy to answer any questions. I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen. I can figure out how to do that. Here we go.
Well, thank you. That was a very good presentation. Actually, it kind of tees us up for our next stages as well, frankly, as far as going through the process of developing our own plans. One of my questions, it actually came out of our conversation with Karen Guz, and it was referenced during Milan's presentation, which is how are you all going about, from an ordinance standpoint, I assume, but nonetheless, how are you going about ensuring that once these reuse systems are put in place, that they are properly maintained? I say reuse or rainwater harvesting systems are properly maintained.
Yeah, that is a great question. We actually, when we were developing our program, we talked to Saws and Karen quite a bit because they have done some, pretty path-breaking work on cooling towers, especially, and AC condensate reuse, things like that. That was one of the concerns that we heard, that really you'll start to see savings drop off if these things aren't properly maintained. Then we spoke to San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. San Francisco Public Utilities Commission was kind of mandated by their council way back in the 90s to start doing more reuse. And they found that on-site water reuse was actually a cost-effective alternative to some of the plans that they had for centralized reclaim. So they've been doing this for a while, and so they had gone through a whole process to develop a regulatory framework that kind of pulled together all of the pieces in terms of like who was going to have oversight, had the regulatory authority to have oversight over these systems, how would a permitting process be established, setting up these like kind of pathways of coordination even within the city, their health authority, their public works folks, their water resources folks, and then kind of trying to streamline this process so that it's easier for the developer to go through this process and you don't lose any systems, as you kind of move along. So we drew a lot from that. They had a blueprint for on-site water reuse, and we drew a lot from that as well. There was a blue ribbon commission that was also developed to turn that blueprint into a kind of more detailed and formalized document, providing the framework for a regulatory system. And so we drew upon that, and kind of customized it to the Texas context, because Texas, has kind of different levels of authority between local and state jurisdictions. So I would be happy to share more information with y'all about what we ultimately settled on in terms of a regulatory framework. I think that's going to be key in ensuring the success of these systems and making sure that we're continuing to get yield out of them.
I think that would be extremely helpful to understand how you guys are going to handle that in a regulatory context. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions, Daryl?
Yeah, you were doing your 2018 plan. You talked about doing your portfolio scoring of the different strategies. Does their 2018 plan have all those that methodology and all those different options that you considered and scored and ranked, or is it just identify those recommended strategies?
Yeah, so we considered we went all the way from a blue sky list down to the smaller list of strategies that I showed on the screen. The blue sky list included maybe from like 70 to 90 strategies as a whole. And then we took that blue sky list and we put it through a screening process. We had some high level metrics to screen by that included, yield and cost. And I think it was like implementation feasibility were the 3 high level screening metrics. And if things, if they didn't meet kind of the thresholds that we had set, then they dropped out of the consideration. And, as we pulled things through the screening process, we realized that strategies were actually fairly similar to one another. And so we were able to kind of combine and consolidate strategies as well. That led us to the smaller list of strategies that we use to develop portfolios. And the list of strategies we used to develop portfolios was longer than even the strategies that I showed on the screen. So the list of strategies we ultimately ended up with fell out of our top scoring portfolio. So as we looked at those things kind of all together. The portfolios that we looked at kind of tried to push the boundaries between things like conservation. So maybe just a portfolio that had nothing but conservation in it. There was supply reliability. So a portfolio that had a good deal of conservation, but maybe something like seawater desal, and just to make it as reliable as possible. And then other, portfolios to just focus on maybe cost, so your lowest cost strategies. And when we evaluated those portfolios, we had 5 portfolios that we started with. When we evaluated those portfolios, we saw how those portfolios performed against one another, and then we created hybrids to try to get the best elements out of each portfolio. So seawater desal may get you, wonderful supply reliability, but it's going to be incredibly expensive. And a conservation-only portfolio, maybe that's lower cost, or it may not be. Maybe that's lower cost, or it's meeting some environmental goals and benefits, but maybe it doesn't get you the supply reliability that you need if you're looking at droughts worse than the drought record. So it's just it was an easy way to do a trade-off analysis and to kind of communicate that to our stakeholders as well. Was that helpful?
It was helpful to me. I would say it sounds like you guys did a very thorough vetting process, obviously. And I appreciate how you all weighed the different variables as well, cost and effectiveness and, reliability.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
I don't think so. Thank you very much. I mean, we got a lot of the great sort of baseline from Karen Gus. I guess one last question would be, who else do you think we ought to talk to that might be able to shed some? I mean, you mentioned San Francisco Public Utilities, but I mean, is there anybody else that you think is just doing amazing work nationwide that would be worth tuning into?
Yeah, that's a great question. So amazing work nationwide. Los Angeles does really good work, and they're kind of like a leader in integrated resource planning. They started off back in the late 90s and were one of the earliest utilities to put together an integrated resource plan. New York City Department of Environmental Protection does a great job, and they have really bought into this kind of one water way of looking at things, so kind of making use of all water. I don't know if y'all are familiar with there's like different paradigms of water planning, and like the integrated water resource planning paradigm emerged from, an AWW definition kind of in the late 90s, and then U.S. Water Alliance and other national organizations have been pushing kind of this one water approach to planning, and NYCDEP has gone all in on that. LA has transitioned to like doing kind of one water style planning, so they'd be another good one to talk to. But then folks like I guess it depends on your sources of supply. but I don't know, are y'all primarily groundwater or surface water? I'm sorry.
Primarily surface water, really. I mean, GBRA, local water reservoir, and then groundwater as well.
Okay. Yeah, I'd say those are two good ones to look at because they have some great surface water components to them. Let me think about it a little bit because I could think of some mid-sized utilities or smaller utilities and some of the planning that they've done, and I would love to follow back up with you. I'm from San Antonio, by the way. I'm from San Antonio. I grew up in Northwest San Antonio, and then my family moved out to Helotes, so I used to ride my bike from Helotes to Bernie quite a bit.
Oh, wow.
So.
May I?
Please. No.
Marissa, Tommy Matthews here. I'm wondering, in y'all's process, did y'all give consideration to the impacts of the different strategies relative to rate structure or what future impacts it might be for that? Because I know there's there's multiple ways to finance water projects, and each thing we do tends to get more and more expensive. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a great question. And so we purposefully focused on, cost at a high level. But the next phases of this, after we had approved the plan and gotten, the go-ahead from City Council, the next phase was really the implementation phase of how do we make this work. And that has included a lot more detailed assessment of, impacts on rates and how we fit some of these projects within our capital planning budgets. I would say that I think it's healthy to include a little bit more of that assessment as you're doing the planning work rather than just saving all of that for implementation. The way that we had started off this process initially was like, this is a strategic level planning process, and we'll kind of get into some of the details about rates and affordability a little bit later. In the strategic level planning process, we were just comparing, upfront capital costs and operational costs kind of against one another in these various portfolios. I think it's healthy to do a little bit more work, and even in the strategic planning process, to look at how you can accommodate the upfront capital costs over time. There may be, a certain amount that you have that you can accommodate or that you consider affordable based on the context of your utility over the planning horizon that you're looking at. And I think it's good to consider that even while doing the planning. But there's kind of a backing up from that even. There's kind of a key piece in terms of like defining what is affordable, right? Like within any utility, you're trying to maintain a certain level of service. And so you have to spend money to maintain that certain level of service. Right. But in terms of just, overall like supply reliability, and depending on the scenarios you're planning for, you have to work with your community to figure out what do we think affordability means in the long term. Those can be difficult conversations. I hope that was helpful. I don't have an exact answer for that, but it's really kind of the process and dialogue of figuring out how do we establish affordability metrics that we can then utilize in how we're setting targets for what capital expenditures we can accommodate within this planning time frame.
No, it is helpful because I think when you're in this phase of strategizing and looking at things, you shouldn't let price keep an idea off the table. That can be evaluated later because technology may solve part of that problem for you, or just raw demand may move the numbers up to where something becomes more affordable. So I think it needs to stay in there. But I was just curious. I know that a little bit and not near enough, but about utility and rate structures. And I know that it can be difficult to plan forward to accrue monies to do things. And I think that's a statutory change that we'll send to Larry that we need to look at. It's to allow utilities to be able to accrue money going forward for conservation efforts or for future water planning. Because I know that passes a little bit of cost on to the ratepayer now, but significantly less than it does over in 20 years. So anyway.
Marisa, I had a question for you. I saw a lot of macro type solutions. Do you have a selection of cultural, educational, individual consumer type tools that you guys use or that you support?
That is a great question. So as we implement advanced metering infrastructure, and as we're able to get more folks using our customer portals, that's when we'll have the data and the information as well as the touch point, I think, to be able to implement some more personalized conservation programs and education. And I would say, y'all have already had the presentation from Saz and from Karen, but they're leading the charge on that, in my opinion, here in Texas. They have done some excellent work with developing these customer relationship management systems and kind of looking at customer water use behavior and patterns at the individual level. So I think we'll be, we're working towards that with our AMI program, and we'll be learning from SAWS as we're establishing our own programs.
All right, thank you. Any other questions from Marisa or Janel?
One of the key lines that you said that I wrote down was you want to create developments that are as efficient as possible. Are there already solutions that you all are that you all are encouraging through either ordinance or through education for these new developments that are going in? So that's getting back to macro.
Yeah, so the landscape transformation is something that we push. So either utilizing native or adaptive plants that are going to be more water efficient, water wise, potentially foregoing permanent irrigation systems. That's part of an education component or an education programming aspect for us. Making sure that irrigation systems, we have codes and requirements to make sure that irrigation systems are efficient. We also have rebate programs to try and make existing irrigation systems as efficient as possible. We have been working with folks in our development services department. It's a separate department from the water utility to try and pull in these larger developments, because we do see these kind of big complexes or campuses that are coming in through our development process, and we try to pull those larger developments in for an in-person conversation so that we can look at their potential water use and try and identify areas for efficiency through either conservation, through landscape transformation, through reduction in irrigated area, or through on-site water reuse or connection to our reclaimed water system. And that is something that we're going to be codifying here probably in October, if we can receive council approval.
Now, is that the same documentation you were referring to on the OWRS programs, or is that something different?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Is that the same type of background information regulation that you mentioned in the OWRS programs that you have? Or?
It's similar, yes. The water benchmarking calculator is a component of the on-site water reuse systems. That information feeds in to both our on-site water reuse system team, and it also feeds into our conservation division, so that we have staff from both teams who can be evaluating that information and identifying opportunities for efficiency.
And is that part of the information that you're able to provide us to take a look at, just to
Yes.
look at the regulatory framework and the design criteria and that sort of thing?
Yes.
Certainly appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Good. All right, we've covered a lot of ground this morning. Let's take about a 5 or 10 minute coffee break if everybody's good, and we'll reconvene in just a few minutes.
Thank you, Marissa and Janelle. This has been really helpful to us, and I really look forward to those resources that you can provide us. Especially the ordinances and things like that you all are thinking about implementing, so that going forward we can think about our own greenfield developments and making sure that they're the best that they can be, most efficient they can be.
Thank you. We're happy to stay connected.
Great.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll be in touch. Thank you both. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Right before the top of the hour.
Yeah, let's reconvene at it's 10:42 now. Say 10:55. I'll give everybody a chance to take care of the business. All right. Why don't we settle back in? I was hoping that we might hear from John Mark before we move into our discussion items, but I don't see him yet. He had some other things to take care of this morning and was going to join when he got those accomplished. Next up on the agenda is sort of going back to what we've heard and begun to digest, and let's see if we can harvest out some of the best things we've heard, talk through them, see where to go from here in terms of identifying our top 5, 10, 20, whatever it is that we think really deserves attention so we can give it the attention it deserves. So I'll just basically open up the floor, reminding you that I thought Karen did a good job of breaking these things down into 3 basic buckets: the incentives, education, and regulation models. And we can attack the problem that way or however you guys like, but I just want to open up the floor so we can begin the discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think a good start would be is the City of Austin actually has that portfolio list and a matrix that they developed of a lot of different strategies, both on the demand side and on supply side. It's probably I would suggest we start with getting that information, that backup documentation, and the scoring methodology on how they valued that. Give us a chance to try to identify which of those may be beneficial to the city, and maybe see how the scoring methodology maybe could be tweaked to how it could be evaluated. I would like to see if there's a chance that SAWS has something like that available as well. I think between Austin and SAWS and potentially NBU, you could probably have a very robust list of just about any kind of strategy that the city would contemplate. I think, and then from there, try to have that list of all the different strategies, both on the supply side and on the demand side, to see how to whittle that down to a list for further evaluation.
Certainly be good to get whatever Austin's got in that regard. I don't think I've seen that portfolio that Daryl's mentioning.
Well, yeah, I think we need to look at, Karen goes, we'll see if she's got something similar. And to his point, let's just layer them on top of each other. We start to see where the similarities are and see kind of how their math all calculates out, and basically just stand on the shoulders of giants, if you will, because they've got, maybe that's overstating it, but basically they've spent the money and the time to vet this stuff, and we might as well borrow the best of the best.
Don't disagree, but we've seen some things at this point in time. I'm interested to know who thinks what's what. We have the benefit of technology. The city's already invested quite a bit of money in technology.
Yep.
Where does that rank in people's respective opinions about what can we use that tool for? We've heard some things. Austin has goals of using that information. Karen made it quite obvious that we ought to be, and they are, creating better synergy with customer base so that people can actually be in the loop. You have enhanced educational opportunities by creating that connection. So I assume that that's something we ought to, that's a no-brainer to me, is enhancing that relationship by getting phone numbers and email addresses for existing customer base and then providing the conduit for the information. So that to me is a no-brainer. But along those lines, I'm interested to know what you guys saw that you liked or think that needs further development, because what I don't want to do is we're not Austin, we're not San Antonio, and I'd like to get out on the table. We've heard literally dozens of options. Is there anything that somebody heard and said, you know what, this is really good for us, and let's develop it a little bit, because we just don't have the opportunity to do that unless we're together. Email is not a good means to attack a problem like that. So that's what I'd like to do, is to have that discussion or begin the discussion.
Well, I think, Patrick, we have to look at it from a couple different ways. It's one thing that's something that will fit well in the structure of the city and city utilities, and the city being the economic hub and obviously the center of water use, but it's not the whole universe of water use.
Agreed.
And so when we look at something, we might say that's great for the city of Bernie, and this is great for Kendall West, or this is great for groundwater users. And so I think each time we talk about each thing, that's kind of the lens I look at it through. We're not going to have, there may be some that bridge across all things. Limiting the amount of landscaping that you have and using water tolerant plants and native species, that's ubiquitous. of course.
Right, and I think that's where you take the information that Austin's going to bring. Somebody, they sat down and they've done the numbers.
Right.
They know what the most effective regulations are to help with construction and so forth, and then we put those before the city in a reasonable fashion, and the city can choose or not to. The county can do nothing about that, right? They're stuck with International Building Code.
Well, they yes and no. And so I've been giving this some thoughts. So I'm going to take plumbing standards, for example. The city can adopt plumbing standards that address efficiency and water use. And they put that in the code. And now we say, all right, well, the county can't do anything about that. But the county does require water availability studies to be done for new development. And they can specify the criteria that those studies have to satisfy in order to be accepted by the county for the furthering of their plat and the development. And so I think that's an area where if we say, all right, plumbing standards and low water use are a very important thing for us, that as an overall recommendation, the city has one tack to implement it, the county has a different tack, and then the other public water supply corporations and private water utilities in the county, to me, they should adopt that. We need to be able to present them something that's adoptable that they can take to their customer base.
Well, and that brings a good point. It brings up the legal side of this. How do we take good ideas and that should be able to go across all venues and present those in a way that makes it make sense and give the tools to not just the city but to the county and those out in the county.
Right.
So that's not an Austin or a Solace problem. That's an us problem.
But I think we can pluck from those saws and Austin's deals, those meat to hang on that skeleton.
Right.
But to me, we want to look at plumbing standards and efficiencies there, which address to conservation. We want to look at the landscaping standards that are in both those plans and other areas, and we want to look at that. I would add to it, even though we haven't talked about it, it's an interesting time out west, and earlier, when Marissa brought up Los Angeles, I thought, well, the West is experiencing some severe drought, and they are having to take some, in many cases, draconian drought measures to deal with the absence of supply. It would be, I think, wise for us to look at that because they have the worst of both worlds. They're in an arid region with no water and expanding population, so they have societal pressures and meteorological natural pressures. There's some things we can take from that and look at that collectively, and even to GBRA as they look at how they manage water within the basin and the system. So I'm not trying to complicate it by throwing that out, but I wanted to throw that in the conversation. The meat and potatoes things, plumbing, landscape standards.
So I'm kind of curious. I agree with what you said, but I also kind of want to have some more clarity on it. When you look out west, you look at what they're doing, the draconian solutions. Part of me goes, wow, draconian solutions, of course, those are like your stopgaps, right? Those are like worst case scenario, you're in it, and you need to know what those are going to be. But at the same time, you also have to make sure that you still have planned for capacity so that you haven't like hit draconian measures and now you're maxed out, right, with total population growth, and now you have nothing left to work with.
Oh, no,
I'm wondering how we're going to also create our, where do we
my point is know what worked and didn't work for them, and that's part of the planning that goes into the drought plan for the city and for the other utilities and even for the water district, knowing that this is what you have to do. That not from a conservation standpoint in a day-to-day deal, but in a worst-case scenario, 2011, 4 or 5 years in a row. The drought of record, the new drought of record, absence of rain, and increased population, societal pressures. And if you look at those things and say, you know what? If we had to do that, that's still not enough. We need to know that.
Right. So you're really looking at taking a fresh look and adjusting your drought contingency measures and your triggers, having earlier trigger points, and maybe having more stricter or different stages of your measures that you implement.
I would think so, Daryl. Yeah.
Well stated, indeed.
So, that's part of planning, and it's part of what we need to know. And it goes into how a municipality or a water provider, it goes into their economics as they evaluate their economics and their revenue stream. So it's part of the deal. So.
Yeah. Well, you identified landscaping, you identified plumbing. and also the drought contingency measures and triggers. Do you want to add education, both community and maybe through schools, to this as well?
Definitely, and that was actually my next thought, Daryl, was, and I've got a copy of Karen's, I don't know if we can do this, but I'd like to put up her presentation from last time, just because it's a nice way to walk through these conceptually, at least have something to point to. I can email it.
Who should we email to?
I was kind of getting that pulled up, and I think we're all in the same mindset. I was sitting there thinking education, because you talk about the limitations of the city to affect the broader water spectrum of Kendall County, just because of the lack of ability to regulate outside the city limits, that education becomes your main tool. We already talked about comfort and the culture of using less water, but getting that mindset and having Bernie be the epicenter for that mindset across the county, which can help the overall water picture in the region. But it's got to be through education, because you can't regulate at the same level outside the city limits.
And I would offer, Kurt, in the last nearly quarter of a century, between the county commissioners court working with the legislature to get the groundwater district established and the groundwater district getting established, and there's been a lot of education that's occurred, because I was there in those early days of the Cow Creek, and there was a whole lot of, why do we need this? What are you going to do? What's the value to me? I don't want that. Milan and I were going back and forth till 11, 12 o'clock at night sometimes. So I think a good piece has been accomplished, and that's important to recognize. But there's still a long way to go. And there's still a lot of people coming here that didn't go through that 20-plus year experience. So I agree with you. Education, both of you guys, that's super important. So.
Well, and that goes back to wanting to create these new schools to be as water efficient as possible, but in a way that demonstrates it to the students. And that's what Wimberley Valley's school has done, I think, fairly well.
Yeah.
Again, the learning lab approach, because curriculum are developed all the time, and I have to be honest with you, I think it's still important to have those pieces, but I'm also skeptical about how deeply they impact students once they're moving from one topic to the next versus living and immersed in a learning lab.
Well, I had a question before we get into the list that Saz had put together and talking. There are very many variations on the theme, but Jeff, what do we have in terms of somebody that's already in place at the city that could add sort of because there's a web component, there's an educational component, that there would be a liaison to school districts and that kind of thing. You need somebody who can spearhead this. Do we have somebody that has capacity for that, or does this need to be something new?
It would be a challenge for us to add that to anybody's duties today. I mean, Ryan and Mike and myself would probably be the people who would be most involved. And they're all busy people, and I'm semi-out. So to your point, that's on my list. That's why I'd like to add and somebody mentioned MBU. Like, they keep coming up, and I used to work there, so I can get their stuff. And they're probably more scalable as to what they're doing than Saz and Austin are going to be. I still think it's a great idea to take what they provided and overlay it and use their work they've already done to help guide us as to where we need to go. But yes, bandwidth of employees and all that good stuff is going to be a question for us. But that's part of the process of saying, here's the things that the committee thinks we ought to do, and we agree. Part of how you get there might be staffing.
Yeah, and that's just part of the staffing question is what's the incremental cost? If we have to get a whole new person, and that whole new person has to have a physical location that we don't already have, then the incremental cost is quite a bit higher than it is if somebody, or duties can be split between some bodies
on the space
that are already there. Right. So that was the reason for the question.
But yeah.
Because someone to really maximize the educational side of this, when we get the PowerPoint up, I think you'll see it, but it's coordination with so many of these different groups and harvesting the information that's out there that's applicable to us. I mean, she lists like a half dozen different networks and groups, from the American Water Works Association to the EPA to the state of Texas, that are in continuous motion generating information that's useful, that we might be able to use, but you got to have somebody in the position to figure out screen through what there is and what's valuable and what's useful, and then disseminate it in an appropriate fashion. And sometimes that's going to be putting that in the hands of decision makers. Sometimes it's getting it in front of teachers, and sometimes it's going in the bill so people know.
Including if we wanted to offer any kind of what Karen called incentives or rewards for certain actions, whether that's rainwater catchment or whatever. So somebody to coordinate that.
I started a conversation with Henry Acosta this last week. He's their operations manager, and brought these up. He's got a lot of other things on his deck right now, honestly, with just trying to make sure they have people to serve lunch and pick up and drive buses, and he's stressed out at the moment. But nonetheless, I think it's one of those things where we go ahead and vet some solutions, some ideas, and present those ideas both to him, and I'll try to keep him in the loop as well as one of his colleagues in the loop with what we're talking about, but then perhaps just take it to the school board and say, we're really serious about water conservation being an ethic that's promoted in the school districts and demonstrated by the school structures as well, the buildings themselves. And go ahead and just make that formal recommendation that they take these ideas seriously, and you know what I mean. Go straight to the top, but also socialize it in the echelons of the school district.
The GBRA's done extensive work through the years helping schools develop curriculum, and created some great modules, and even put the kiosk at the library and other things that are water related. So. I know there's been some dialogue there, and there's certainly maybe something to build on.
Obviously it would take more information, but ballpark, what does it take to add somebody with some years of experience? Do we have the physical space to put somebody
Physical
here?
space.
I mean, what's the incremental cost of adding somebody that could do something like that?
I'm trying to think if it was somebody comparable to Ryan without getting into his personal business, but I think at least with benefits, and I'm not counting any equipment like computers and things like that, we'll be fine there. That's a $50,000 position plus benefits, 60, 70.
Okay. So that means that you need at least that amount of offset in benefit to make it worth it, right? So.
Yeah,
but just something to yardstick it, right?
Yeah. Well, when you say offset and benefit, a lot of times we're trying to teach people how not to buy our product.
It's relative, but if you're saving water, it costs you something.
That you don't need another water supply, right? That's the benefit. So.
Right.
So what would be the scope of this role? Because I have somebody in mind that could play. And I would see them more. I mean, the other thing, too, could be that they're on contract, so that you're not having to shoulder that, because we're not talking about necessarily a long-term, full-time role necessarily, at least not at this point.
Yeah, I don't know. I bring it up because somebody's got to carry the water, and if it's a useful function, and if it's conservation is cultural, you're talking about education that continues, it's perpetual.
Right.
To your point, it could be contracted. My guess is this will be a long-term effort.
Yeah, I mean, Ryan started on contract, so.
That's right. That's true.
But anyway, so I've got some thoughts on that that I was going to talk to actually the mayor in particular about, and I can talk to Ben and you about as well. But at the same time, like you're saying, budget, so we have to work within constraints.
Yes, but this is the mayor's committee. The council's been 100% behind it. Mm-hmm. This just starts to build the data case for why you need another person. Eventually, if not next fiscal year, then the one after that. So, but having gone through the same process at MBU again, that went back in the 80s when there was no such person there. Now there's a department regarding conservation and enforcement and ordinances and things like that. So that's why I say I don't think we'd ever go back to not having the role once we had it. I think there'll be plenty to do. And don't forget, we're an electric and gas utility as well. So there's conservation efforts in all those utilities that could be pushed further.
I'm curious, just while you're mentioning NBU, do you think we could line somebody to present to us?
Sure.
Line up somebody? Yeah.
Yep.
Next meeting, I think that could be great, because I think that would round it out from a standpoint of other regional entities that are getting pretty hardcore about water conservation.
Yeah, I was going to say, they got mentioned by Karen. I did watch her presentation. I didn't get to see it, but you and I talked to her the day before too. So And she specifically called them out as having some pretty strong enforcement capability, and I'm curious as to how they're doing that. And is that an MBU person, or is that a city person? Over there, it's kind of like SAWS and the city, right? MBU is a separate entity of the city. So that may not even be an MBU person. That could be somebody in code compliance on the city side, but let's find that out. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Do you want to take that on, or do you want me to? Okay.
No, I'll be glad to make the contact.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. Did we lose? I just sent you another copy by another way, so hopefully that will work. Do we still have everybody out there on the Zoom call? Or did we drop? Oh, I see Don Miller's up there. Okay. So that's kind of one of the educational things, but that's one of the reasons I want to get the slideshow up is if we can.
So I think the educational has 3 legs. It's like a golf game. Not that I'm a good golfer. Yeah, you got your putt, that's a short game. You're right there by the hole. The dashboard satisfies a lot of that. Having a dashboard, having access to information on a real-time basis just raises awareness. And then you've got the long game, which is a generational change in the way people view things from a cultural standpoint. And the middle piece of that is those keeping the public informed of what's coming up. The Cow Creek meetings are coming up, or the city's going to be talking about a water topic, or, hey, here's a link to the Texas Water Development Board, or here's the way they've changed SWIFT funding, here's what SWIFT funding is, or here's a constitutional amendment that's coming up. Creating an informational base where people can look at the longer, the more near-term stuff, what's going to come up in the future. And they can participate, and anybody participating, even if they have a contrary opinion, is of tremendous value to the whole discussion. So I think those are the 3 legs that go with that thing as we look at it. And so
Are you having technological success or no? Okay. When you get there, would you just move over to slide 10? And these were just Daryl, I know you weren't able to make the last meeting, but these were just a summary of things that they're looking to. They have actual partnerships with folks on the ground, right? And some of those are going to spin off, whether it's master gardeners or so, those will be seasonal things, right? You're going to have people, hey, come learn about how to do this, how to do that. We had when the spring replanting, when we try to get everybody to go with native items instead of non-native items when we're replacing things after the freeze. It would be a perfect linchpin opportunity for somebody. But somebody's got to carry the water, which is kind of my thought. Through all of this, we can have as many good ideas as we want, but there's really nobody there to implement them and make sure we get some feedback about how they're working. Then it really doesn't make much difference because it's just more paper that's sitting on the shelf somewhere.
Right.
And so all of these seemed like, and this kind of goes to what Karen and her team do, but those are all things that seem like we ought to figure out how well they work for us or might work for us. And maybe the first question is, do we suggest that there's a person that becomes the point person for all things conservation/water, and give a laundry list of existing programs that make sense, they're working other places. We'll take Austin's list, and then maybe amongst us we can rate those or rank them with our particular thoughts. This is better than that, whatever. But that to me is something very tangible that would help implementation of the good ideas you guys are already talking about. That makes sense. I'm going to plant that seed, and then I'm going to move on just to make good use of time, and I know.
So I can reach out to Karen if you guys like and just say, hey, do you have like, the equivalent of what Austin has? Send her a screenshot or whatever, and just say, can you send that to us? And then we can go ahead and take that, maybe throw in NBU stuff, depending on the timeline, that's how things shape up, and then and then create almost like a master document of just the list, the great list, and how each utility has sort of ranked it or scored it or whatever for savings.
If that's possible, I mean, what I'd like to see is get sooner rather than later to that laundry list of great ideas, and then get impact or feedback on those, and then let's get what we think our action list is. Our action list is not going to be take every one of those great ideas. It's going to be, we need 1 or 2 or 3 action list items, and then from there they harvest the things that really work, right? And then you have incentives. I heard stuff about flow meters and that kind of thing, right? I mean, there seems like there's some value to that, but is that something that what do you guys think about that? I mean, is that something that's going to work in our community? Is that something that ought to be tailored more to a commercial user? I mean,
I don't know. This gets back to like having the list and looking at it and doing comparative analysis.
No, I think it would work here. It will take some education and some effort, but and there's some cost associated with that.
I do think near term, because again, we're expecting this doubling of population or more for various reasons, whether it's regional, but I think we need to embed as much into policy as we can so that the city itself is actually developing with the smartest solutions going forward. And then I also think we may need to have that critical conversation with the WCID3 folks and George's Ranch and just say, look, we're trying to do something that secures everyone's water future and has cost benefit advantages perhaps to you and your system. Yeah.
And we kind of jump to this a lot. Let's back out of incentives then. Let's move to the other leg of the stool and talk about regulation. Because a lot of what we've talked about comes back to construction standards, landscaping standards, those sorts of things. Going forward, how do you direct the culture, not just educationally, but you create performance requirements, and that drives the bus, right?
Right.
So what have you heard that you think is effective? Now, we're going to get a laundry list, I hope. That was my question for Austin, is we should get a laundry list of here's how we're regulating, and some of those are going to be acceptable and some are not.
Right.
And we can figure that out because we don't have it in front of us. But what else ought to be considered? If we're coming up with the gross list of the top 2 or 3 things that you've heard from a regulatory standpoint, what do we need to be thinking about? So we make sure we get whoever needs to be in the room so that you guys get the best information you can get, because it won't be long and we're going to be in a position where we need to make decisions, and I want to make sure that you've seen everything you need to see. Mm-hmm. So what categories of regulation or control or oversight or direction seem most appropriate? I mean, you've got stuff that's go forward, right? That's the construction and that sort of thing. You got things that are there for people, or maybe they're retooling at the house or in their business. Those are their tools there. There may be others I'm not thinking of, but I'd like to make sure we identify those 2 or 3 or 4 categories, whatever it is, so that we make sure we've got whatever the best knowledge is out there, so that when we get it in front of you, somebody didn't come back and say, hey, there's a 5th category we haven't considered.
You know, it seems that going forward is the easier part. It's the retooling, the retrofitting that's a little more complicated. And it's first complicated by how do you pass the cost, how do you handle the cost component of that. And I think that's something that we ought to, if we're serious about this, which I think we ought to look at that. What is that? What are some ranges of costs to go into a home built in the 1980s and retrofit it with fixtures? And then how do you incentivize that? And there's going to be some monetary contributions. Once you come up with those numbers, all right, now where do we come up with the money? How do we do that? Is it done by the utilities? Is it done in conjunction with a grant from the state? I'm going to throw wild things out there. Is it done with, hey, we could do this on 15,000 wells in the county and it would save X amount of water, and the Cal Creek puts together a bond package to finance that? They have the authority under Chapter 36. That's something that's way out there, but it's certainly within the realm of things to consider. And how do you do that? And how do you, and how do you leverage those dollars? So.
Well, and there's ARPA dollars for the city and county. Right now, there's millions of dollars, and that's not just us. That's nationwide right now.
Right.
And those go to public health. We may never see money like that again, so, and who knows what it's going to be used for, but if they're good ideas, then maybe they need to come to the forefront at a sooner time rather than later, because the money's not going to last forever.
Yeah, so we talked about that last night at Cow Creek, and we're working on our own wish list so we can better monitor groundwater. But to that very point, I do think we need to go ahead and create our wish list. It's coming in two tranches. As I understand it, the city and the county have agreed to, I think, $3.5 million and some sort of MOU for I don't know what, because they have to deal with flood mitigation issues, which I think is probably one of the factors. I don't know what else. But I do think we need to make sure that we're putting our needs into their realm of consideration soon rather than later, before ideas get ossified about what's best. Because who cares about floods if you don't have water to drink?
But you talk about incentives. That may be a tool, right? There's money. It's always about money.
Be creative and be aggressive.
All right, so help me figure out what we ought to be talking about in terms of the regulation or the look forward. It sounds like a look backwards. It's a little more troublesome, but that's only because we're worried about money. If money were not an object, what are programs that we ought to be thinking about? And then, we say no later, but this is the time to say, yeah, let's talk about it.
What would we do? What might it cost, and how do we pay for it?
Right.
Yeah, that's too hard. So, yeah.
Well, so we've talked about flow sensors and smart controllers. Those are tools for existing and go forward.
With our AMI system in the city, with that AMI system, does that even need to be done, or is that something that can that data be somehow? Is there a way to set up a system where basically people can get notified, hey, you got an issue?
I don't know. Mike?
There is. It takes more time and more maintenance, but there's also some technology out there. Karen goes at those flow meters that you can put on your house, or basically you have your own house covered when you've got a problem. And those are things that we can incentivize, but people may want to have this because they're able to pay for themselves.
Yeah, they were talking about putting together an app, basically, and then it could send you alerts or whatever. No different than buying one of these things. You don't have to buy one if we have one built in. And then, certainly the economies are a little bit better. We're not incentivizing somebody to go buy something. We've already got it there. So the dollars spent seem like they'd be a little more reasonable.
How many residential customers in the city? Remind me.
How many customers are we building? Meters, 7,000.
Okay. John Mark, in y'all's system, how many residential connections?
Right around 1,500 to 1,500.
And Daryl with Cordillera?
300 to 400.
Okay. Lots of opportunity.
Smart meters, and that helps a lot.
Okay.
So on the city smart meters, is this a fixed base? Is it read twice a month, once a month, weekly?
Once a day.
Once a day? So you have the ability to send alerts out if there's a usage above a certain average.
You can write those kind of
Yep.
programs.
Or 24-hour continuous usage.
Correct.
Indicating leaks and so forth.
It's just an algorithm.
Yep.
I was just doing the quick math. If you have 7,000 connections, and say you said it's $500 each to put in a flow meter, versus that's $3.5 million.
Yeah.
Versus if we were to put a little effort in at the utility level and create a notification system.
Yeah.
Okay, so you do that. What's the expected return? What do you get out of it?
Right.
And then I think that needs to be an important part of the discussion, right?
You're going to have some meter control, like we were doing the conversion from smart meters. The real reason for smart meters is because you're able to give the customer real-time information, and he's like, oh, I didn't have a leak. It's like, no, we notified you on this day, this day, you did a 60-day report history of you were notified and this is what your flow of water and that kind of stuff. So
you're not going to see an economic benefit from that other than the customer satisfaction and dispute resolution relative to, and that's what we've seen the greatest benefit, except for the triggers that you're going to do. The only other thing I was going to say from a financial, who would pay, that kind of stuff, and this is a conversation, it's not a very popular term, and nobody wants to discuss it, but pricing. Pricing is the greatest conservation tool that you have. Nobody wants to talk about it because everybody expects water to be free and effective. They'll pay a $700 electric bill, but oh my God, it's $100 water bill. Okay? Which is completely, electricity is far more available than water. But yet we've got this somehow upside down that somehow pressurized clean water, drinking water is supposed to be delivered by us for free. So we've had 3 instances in KWU where we have gone through, and like when we took over Drought, okay, Drought was a perfect example. When we took over that system, they had used over 70 million gallons. Well, there wasn't a single meter that had been set in that subdivision when we took over ready to go. I mean, it was like a free-for-all, okay? It looked like the Garden of Eden, Georgia, everybody was walking and stuff like that. So the first thing we did, unpopularly, we set everybody's meters, okay? And they have a graduated system relative to when they get over 15,000 gallons, it costs them $15 a gallon. Well, one guy came back and his first water bill was $4,000. He was watering every night. He had no clue how much he was doing. But it's amazing how people start to self-regulate when they have to write a check. And if that check doesn't hurt them from that standpoint, then you can have all the conservation education, you have all the tools in the world and that kind of stuff. But if we're talking about 7,000 gallons for $6. I can't even buy a Big Mac and a Coke. So it's, what I'm saying is to be able to fund some of these things, if you look at the pricing structure, and let's say that, you know, hey, the people in the landscape are helping pay for some of this other stuff. And they do have graduated, where we understand the fixed income, we understand the concerns of people that aren't watering and doing stuff. And if we understand that, and then when we get higher usages, and that extra revenue that is generated from those higher uses help pay for some of these funding other programs, then it's the self-funding program.
Yeah. Tiered rate structure is important, and maybe it can be more punitive. I mean, on the upper end.
Perfect example is Copper Ridge. I mean, NDU, we did the engineering for that. They had all kinds of problems. They were having all kinds of trouble trying to keep up with the production, but they had 1 acre lot. Okay, their base rate was $14, and their usage rate was $2.50. People on 1 acre lots spend $1 million in a house and have an $800 electric bill. Is not going to think twice. So they were using an acre to an acre and a half a year of water per house.
Wow.
But I mean, you can't blame them. The water's supposed to be there where they have a supply issue, but the pricing structure was completely unfit. So, I mean, the guy spends $1 million in a house that has $200,000 in landscaping. You can't get mad at him for a $200 water bill. I mean, he's doing what's available.
Right. Well, that certainly rate structure has got to be part of that discussion, the regulation.
That's not a popular discussion.
It's not, but we're not the people who are running for election, so.
Our council
That's
has
somebody
been
else's
supportive.
problem.
Council's been very supportive of that. I mean, they're, to John Mark's point, we're very cautious about the rates for the first 5,000, 10,000 gallons. But after that, they've been pretty clear about sending the message, including the last rate increase we just put in place on reclaimed water.
Yeah, for the reclaimed water, yeah, that was good. All right, so other areas of regulation we need to be making sure we get all the information we can so we can put them in the bucket.
Really curious to see how they handle the irrigation systems that are in place, existing, because that's the one where I think there is a lot of wasted water. And any of us can drive down the street and see a house that's been there a few years and they're watering as much asphalt as they are their lawns.
So how do you handle that? I mean, you permit it like you do a septic system, or I mean, what do you do practically?
I think Karen mentioned they have some kind of an annual inspection that it's on the customer to submit something that says maybe it wasn't annual, maybe that's too often, but something that says the irrigation system has been looked at, it is functioning properly.
They did that for the large commercial systems and developments, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, not the individual homeowner, I don't think, but
Well, maybe you do it for users over a certain number of gallons per year or whatever. Like that.
yeah.
Well, if the goal is 140 gallons per day, that per capita goal, that's what, roughly 4,200, 4,300 gallons a month. To me, that's one of your break points in your pricing structure, is you're trying to target to get people to that goal, to that number. So
I think 70% of our customers are within that already.
It's always the fringes that cost more money, right? It's the fringes that are the ones that drive the most obtuse results.
So to that, do you weigh protecting utility revenues, because you got to continue to maintain and pay and operate the system and pay back bonded indebtedness. And then, to me, you push that down as far as you can. Water's always been too cheap. I've been doing this for 25 years. It's always been too cheap. Daryl's heard me say it before when I was on the GBRA board. Really, that's our rate? Can we raise that rate? It's too cheap. It's too cheap, and groundwater's far too cheap. And I realize we own the water under our land and that, but we still have a community responsibility to each other. So.
All right, we can spend an awful lot of time on this, and what I'm going to ask everybody to do, and I'll send out, hopefully in the next week or two, a preliminary list of what I think I've heard in terms of subject matters under each of these that we ought to be thinking about. And if you would add anything you think is missing, or if it's in the wrong bucket, say so. But we've got to put our arms around what the scope of this thing is, and then make some decisions about what stays in it and what comes out of it. And so I'd like to do that, and then have a list next time we meet. See if we can visit with the MBU folks and start going through the list and cutting what doesn't belong, and getting an action plan for what stays in, what don't we know that we need to know, and start putting together a plan to get something tangible put together. To make
And so you want to go ahead and just create like a buckets, basically, a whole bunch of buckets, and then just go ahead and throw in this, fill in the swim lanes, as they say, and yeah.
Yep. And let's get our scope figured out and plow through that. And so it'll just be one of these wide open discussion meetings next time. We'll have a list. We'll cut it down. We may add a couple of things.
So the other thing that's just coming to mind is it's to think in terms of, you can say it's ambitious enough just to say cut back use, but I wonder if we need to think about what our target is, our per person use. So if we're at 140 now, hypothetically, or whatever, and Comfort's over there at 98.
Well,
let's get to 100, man.
Well, Mike's talked about this before in some respects, and I think he's got some targets in mind. But part of that too is going to be data driven, and we don't have the data yet. So
that I got to get that right
filled in at some point in time. The other side of this coin is we've got to talk about source stuff, and I want to make sure that we've got a pipeline to figure out what we're going to talk about source. Daryl, I didn't get your comments in at the last meeting, but you had some great comments. I've got your email right here if you want to read it into the record. But I want to make sure that those get talked about briefly today. So the next time we meet, we need to be talking about what the issues are with sources. We've already talked to Larry Bailey. He's supposed to be identifying the legal hurdles as the sources. I know we've talked about other lawns, brought up some thoughts about sources right here at home. But I want to make sure we tap whatever source means and get the same list on it. Mm-hmm. Because we need to analyze each of those and put together the information so that people that ask us to do this get the information they want so they can make a decision. So I want to accomplish that same goal next time. Daryl, I didn't want to steal your thunder, though, speaking about source information and about the GBRA water issue coming up. So if you'd like to speak to that, that'd be great.
Sure. As I mentioned before, SAWS has 4,000 acre feet from our Western Canyon system. That water will approximately 2,500 to 4,000 acre feet of that will be coming back most likely at the end of 2037. I think what GBRA is looking is to how we're potentially going to distribute that water. to existing customers, new customers, and most likely will be to existing customers. I think the city probably needs to take a look to see if they're interested in obtaining any of that water and probably doing some type of formal proclamation at some point for whatever amount that they're seeking, whether it's some or all of it, so that GBRA is aware. I think the other piece of that is for the city to also identify when they would like to know if they're going to have the opportunity for that water, such as 2025 would be my suggestion. That way you've got at least 12 years to plan for that water coming or not coming and looking at other sources. That's probably the cheapest water that's going to be available, new water available to the city, other than something conservation. So I think that's something that the city probably needs to take a look at. In addition to that is to take a look to see whether or not the city wants to continue that as a base flow or add some type of peaking component to it for GBRA to consider. There will likely have to be some additional construction at GBRA's facilities to be able to deliver that water, but it's still going to be the next cheapest water that's available to the city.
Good, Good thoughts. Thank you. So, and from a timing standpoint, you feel that relatively urgent for us to?
GBRA is starting to take a look at that now to see what it's going to take to move the water around our system and what improvements would be needed. We're going to be making certain assumptions initially for how that might be allocated, but at this point, I've heard from just about every existing customer of GBRA's that they all would want just about every bit of that water if possible. But I think it'd be good to go ahead and something formal from the city on that to request as much of that as they could, or if there's a specific amount that you're seeking. The other piece the other key piece is to when you would like to have that determination made by GBRA, because you don't want to wait until for us to make that decision in 2032, 2035, or whenever, because you're going to have to make plans accordingly if based on the amount of water that you may or may not get out of this.
Right, and you may not get it is the point.
I've got lots of requests for it, both existing customers and wannabe customers of GBRA.
Right.
So one of the questions I'll have as we get further into this is, the firmness of GBRA supply amidst all of its allotments. And I've heard, people question that. I certainly have seen Canyon Lake during 2011's drought, and it was drawn down pretty far. So I'm not saying we have to answer it now, but I guess I'm kind of curious as to.
We view that as very firm. Even in 2011, the drought contingency measures did not kick in.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So, I mean, we've not hit those drought contingency measures in the last decade plus. So, it is a very firm supply. We're not using. At some point, I would expect the drought contingency measures to kick in down the road, because frankly, at this point, there's many customers who are not using the full capacity of their allotment yet. Mm-hmm. But as time goes on, this is a very fast-growing region. I don't have any more water in Canyon Lake. All of it is fully allocated. This is a rare instance where an allocation is coming back to GBRA for us to reallocate. So, but it's firmer than some of the groundwater supplies that some of the entities currently utilize.
Fair enough.
Well, appreciate you sharing that. It's obviously something that needs to be on the list of things to consider and discuss. It leaves us a few minutes. I'm sorry, John Mark, it cut you pretty close, but it gives you about 15 minutes to address the issue. If you don't mind, just because it's hard to hear and they're recording this, and I'm sure people would like to be able to hear you.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to discuss this as far as the sewer treatment plant permit that we're doing at Tapatio. It's pretty interesting. I'm going to start like at the 30 to 50,000 foot level, and then we'll work down into the details real quick. So, as you know, when I took over Kendall West in 2012, as far as the existing sewer treatment plant, there was a lawsuit between Harpole and I who owned that, even though that we had been paying capitalization since the beginning of time. That plant was built in 1981. So TCEQ didn't do anything. Harpole and I, we came to an agreement relative to being able to lease a plant. We've been able to extend that lease a couple times. Currently, our lease is up December of 2022. So 15 months from now is when our lease is up. We have been unsuccessful in negotiating a lease extension with him to marry to our existing permit for the existing plant goes until 2025. Okay, so that's the contractual obligations relative we have. We've had numerous attempts to try to work towards that. But again, that's not a long-term solution. So part of the thing that I had to have with Kendall West is we had to have a long-term plan. And that was what I always said. So there wasn't an agreement between the golf course and the utility company for a long-term plan with regard to reuse. So one of the first things I did with Northview is we worked out a long-term reuse plan. Currently, they're using, I think it's 277 or 272 acre-feet of Cow Creek water to be able to irrigate the golf course. So what I did with them is I went to them and I said, okay, we need to have a long-term game plan. You know, Tapatio Springs is a valuable resource to the county, and being able to have a golf course there, I think everybody can attest that that's a good thing. So they agreed to a long-term agreement and partnership, so where as we deliver up to 400,000 gallons a day with them, then they will relinquish, like at the first 100, then they relinquish 25% of their Cow Creek supply. What that does for it is very similar to what we're doing currently with our GBRA water. We only use the Cow Creek water between like April, May, and September. And then we're using our GBRA water all during the base period of when you're not irrigating anything. So we'd be able to do that same thing. So like some of the property around Tapatio Springs, what my thinking was, we'll use that water for peaking requirements, okay? And then we'll exchange our GBRA water into reuse, and that'll be used on the golf course. So there's a signed document relative to long-term agreement relative to the reuse supply with Tapatio Springs for the irrigation of the golf course, and their commitment to being able to get off the dependency of groundwater. So it was a great, moment to be able to achieve that and get that done. Speaking of allocation of water, we have 750 acre feet. We're only using 200 acre feet of our 750 acre feet of GBRA water. So like when we did the shoreline development, I can't control what happens at Tapatio, okay? So if it's going to happen in my lifetime, I had to think of ways to be able to get more of the GBRA water back to the Tapatio Springs area, because that made the most sense, okay? Back between 2012 and 2014, there were numerous discussions with the city of how we could all work together, and it was just cost prohibitive to try to take sewer water from Tapatio all the way down to the south side, to the southeast side of Bernie, and then take that reuse all the way back to Tapatio. We investigated all that with Tom and George at the time, and I mean, numerous conversations were had, and it just wasn't feasible. So the best thing to do is to have a plant that is capable of being able to reuse this water. So there's the shoreline development. The shoreline development pipes all the way back as a customer support for this. So that's 70,000 gallons a day is what we're approximating on 350 homes that's going to go to this new plant, okay? So when we started permitting this, which we submitted the permit I think a year or two ago, which we're not even required to at this point in time because of the capacity. We're only about 50% utilized on our capacity. It's a time constriction at this point in time of when we can and can't use the existing plant. The other thing is that plant is 40 years old. There is a technological issue, and at some point in time it needs to be replaced. We're starting to get to that point. I had to spend $40,000 this year on the plant. You know that there's a life cycle, and there's a life cycle for that one. And there's also great technology available. We're proposing NBR technology with regard to that. The water that we're proposing to discharge is of the utmost quality. TCEQ does not have a problem, and that was the reason why they issued the permit the way that they did. Even from a standpoint of human contact, there's no issues with it. Okay, so we went through this process and started this. We even have a long-term plan of how we're eventually going to take the GBRA water that we're delivering in the I-1046 range. Currently, we have a short-term solution with the city of Bernie to treat that, and then eventually that water too will head back to Tapatio for treatment. The ultimate goal is to be able to get the golf course off of dependency of Cow Creek groundwater. So that's the big picture of how we have all this planned to be able to be the best steward of the GBRA water that we have available to us. Okay, so I think it's a pretty good deal. We're currently having a little bit of opposition. It is interesting to note the only opposition that was granted a hearing live in the Ridge. And basically those people don't want the new plant as you drive up into the Ridge. what we did is we went to the golf course and we purchased from them 13 acres to be able to put the plant there, only for the purpose of that. We can't use it for apartments. We can't do anything that. But that gave us enough room to be able to buffer. We're proposing to put the plant in a building. And we're continuing to work with these people and see, what we can't get accomplished. There's been one thing where they're wanting to try to require, once Save Our Springs, I hired the attorney, Save Our Springs, they're trying to do a TLAP, but that's just not feasible for that quantity of water. It doesn't make sense. The discharge that we're proposing is more than acceptable. So hopefully we can work out a solution with them. We've tried to, work with Harpel, and hopefully we would be able to leave the plant at the existing location, and maybe that quells a good portion of the opposition, and we can proceed on. That would be the ideal situation, and hopefully we're able to come to that. And then at that point in time, I don't think we will have much opposition at all as far as what we're proposing to do. But it's really about being a good steward and sort of putting the finishing touches on a really a 10-year project to build our pipeline and have a long-term effluent plan and to be good stewards of what resources we have,
This is type 1 effluent, or from TCEQ standpoint, it's type 1. And the nutrient loads are kind of the concern that Harpel has, as I understand it.
No, it's not. It's that all the nutrient loads and everything that we're talking about are well within the reasons. TCEQ at this point in time is going to come to our defense relative to everything that we're proposing with regard to the TLAP.
And then what's the constraint on TLAP? Is it just cost, or is it the storage of that quantity of water, or?
Well, I would say that TLAP is a good buzzword as far as stuff goes. The way that the relationship works with the golf course actually has a bed and banks permit back from the original of when they were done. So what makes the most sense is discharging in at the main lake to be able to keep the main lake full, but then they can irrigate out of that. So there's actually with the way that our agreements are constructed, they would be able to utilize the bed and banks. We could utilize the discharge. So the fact of the water ever going downstream is highly unlikely, ever. Because the way that I have it constructed relative to the agreements and the permits that are already in place, it would never go any further down. TLAP is one of those things from a standpoint. If you start talking about, if you're talking about a septic system and aerobic for a house or a little commercial deal, that's one thing. You start talking about 500,000 gallons a day, and you get to a certain point at a golf course. Let's say you go through the period that we had in the last, it's not the last 30 days, but when it rains every day and it's like Georgia, and you can't put more water on that golf course, then where else are we going to go? You can't put it in the floodplain. You can't put it on 20% slopes. So who's going to dedicate the 100 acres or 80 acres that it would require for the additional irrigation land, the hay land, that you're going to do all of it in? There's an economic impact there. That land is very developable land, and who's going to donate that land to be able to make that happen? So. And it also becomes an economic deal. So there's a huge difference between the TLAP requirement of a cost standpoint and what we're currently proposing. And again, that just has to be borne by the ratepayers for all those extra costs that you would have. So, but the nutrient loads, like I said, TCEQ is going to come to our defense. They'll be our expert witnesses because they've already issued the permit and they are approving of everything that we're proposing from a technology standpoint.
So I'm not really trying to litigate this at all with you. I'm just sort of trying to understand. But TCEQ does have, they do allow certain levels of nitrogen release, and then of course every now and then you get a phosphorus flush during, say the fall months or spring, depending on when leaves are being shed, and then that tends to lead toward algal blooms, and so. I sit there and I go, well, why would Jay Harpel have an issue with receiving this water in his lake? And that would be the only reason I could think he would have an issue with it.
Man, I think it's better for me to not comment at this point in time with regard to that, especially until we get to a point where we get this resolved a little bit. Like I said, it's probably better for me not to comment right now on that. So.
Well, John Mark,
figure that out.
I know the water districts going back and forth through the years with those wells out there at Tapatio. And it's always been a question of why can't you get more effluent onto the golf course? And use it
because there hasn't been a plan.
And I know it hadn't been present. So I know your efforts have moved that to reality, so.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you recognizing that, because, that was when I took over in 2012, I mean, and I'm extremely appreciative of the relationship that we've had with the city of Vernon. I mean, starting with, the thing was, we went from a little utility company that was bankrupt to basically a regional provider that we can service Marilomas, we can have a regional plant, we can do these things. And we're a true partner from that standpoint relative to receiving site, and those kind of things. But, it started in 2012 when they allowed us to wheel water. And then that got our feet on the ground and we were able to build our pipeline. People want to talk about funding, and they want to talk about TWA, and they want to talk about none of that funding is available to an IOU, unfortunately. And at the end of the day, it's a taxpayer that's going to pay for it anyways, as far as that kind of stuff goes. And we had to build our pipeline. Just like in this situation, we have to have a bona fide long-term plan with regard to reuse and effluent.
Right.
And being able to reuse that water, you want to talk about conversation, but being able to reuse that water on a daily basis coming from the GBRA is absolutely the smartest thing that you could ever ask for. That's a huge amount of water that gets to be reused. During the summer months, they're going to be using 400,000 or 500,000 gallons a day. During the winter, it's only 200 or 300, but still, that's a substantial. So I appreciate you recognizing that.
Well, and it enhances the vibrancy of the golf course and the resort, which has a significant economic value and cultural value to the area. So it's a lot of extras.
I'm confident we'll be able to find a reasonable solution for all parties. I'm confident that we have a good plan, and I think it will get executed. So I think it's just a matter of a little bit of nuances that need to be worked through, and I think we'll be able to find a good solution.
Thank you, John Mark.
Yeah.
Any final questions or thoughts? All right. Thank you again. Appreciate you coming down and add to the conversation. Thanks, everyone, for taking the time today in an effort to honor your time and giving up 3 hours of your day. I'm going to make sure that we got out of here on time. I'll send around an email with the working list that we talked about. Please give me your thoughts, and let's plan to come back and knock some of this down next time so we can get a little closer towards getting to working a written work product.
We shooting for a month from now? Plus or minus?
More or less, yes, sir.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.